Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Madam Presiding Officer, Chief Secretary, Deputy Chief Secretary, Secretaries and Assistant Secretaries, my colleague, Minority Councillor, Representative for Roxborough Argyll, Administrators of the Tobago House of Assembly, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the viewing and listening public, members of the media, good morning. Today, I stand before you with a heavy heart and a resolute spirit to address the Tobago House of Assembly's draft budget estimate. Our beautiful island, brimming with potential and rich in culture, has found itself at a crossroads. The hopes and aspirations Tobagonians held dear, the dreams they nurtured when they cast their votes for the progressive Democratic Patriots, have not been realized under the current administration after 2.5 years in office. Madam Presiding Officer, let me share with you two heartbreaking stories. One is a story of a young boy named John on the threshold of adulthood, full of dreams and hopes for a brighter tomorrow. John envisioned a future where opportunities would abound, where hard work would be rewarded, and where the community in which he lives would thrive. He believed in the promise made to him, trusted the leadership that vowed to guide him, and looked forward to a future of prosperity. Little did he realize that he was being misled. That like the proverbial dog on the bone, he was led to believe that things would be brighter under this administration. As time evolved, it became clearer and clearer that his ambitions to be gainfully employed, to own a home, and start a family were becoming more and more elusive. The other story, Madam Presiding Officer, is that of a single mother with 3 young children who was unceremoniously terminated from her CPEP job under the guise of restructuring. Madam Presiding Officer, I ask the question, what should this mother do when her hungry children begin to cry in her ears? When she's unable to pay her rent? When she's unable to clothe her children or simply send them to school? I ask, what is she to do? I ask again, these are not isolated stories. These stories represent what is increasingly becoming normalized in our Tobago society. In fact, these scenarios bear eloquent testaments of what is clearly a failed administration under the leadership of the member for Palo-Tuve, Lansfomé, Speyside. You see, Madam Presiding Officer, it was a house built not only on sand, but populated with straw men and women, all of whom received their strength from the missing member for Roxborough Argyll. Madam Presiding Officer, their collective unworthiness for office was soon exposed and the mask of their duplicity removed. I am certain you would be as pained as I am to recall the Chief Secretary telling the Tobago public that his budget presentation would focus on human development. Madam Presiding Officer, I am still waiting to hear that element of the budget presentation. I am still awaiting the section that speaks to human development. But neither you nor the Tobago public should be surprised, because this was the Chief Secretary who announced an impending reshuffle of his secretaries that didn't materialize until more than 1 year later. And even as we speak, we are seeing this reshuffle coming in, one job. And I hear we have another job today. So perhaps we should expect his articulation of plans for Tobago's human capital development in another 18 months or so. Madam Presiding Officer, there's an old Tobago saying, when green leaf fall a water, it all rotten same time. What we have seen with this administration is the continuing rot of the once green PDP leaf. And no attempt to change the color will help their survival. A THA election is around the corner, and I am certain that the Tobago public will respond, as we always do, to rotting carcasses. Madam Presiding Officer, in the lead up to this budget response, I embarked on a comprehensive consultation journey, engaging with a broad spectrum of Tobago stakeholders. We spoke to people from the Tobago Chamber of Commerce, to the Tobago Hospitality and Tourism stakeholders, from the Tobago Mass Fraternity, to our very vibrant cultural communities. I, along with my colleague, Councillor Daniel Benoit, we walked the length and breadth of our island. Yes, from Charlottesville to Crown Point, Castara to Scarborough. These discussions revealed a unified voice of concern, disappointment, and a shared desire for meaningful change. Madam Presiding Officer, the following comments represents a summary statement of the views shared with me, and I quote, "We, the people of Tobago, place our trust in the PDP with high expectations, believing that our dreams and aspirations would be realized. However, the reality has been a stark contrast. The economy is weakening. Youth unemployment and underemployment is rampant. And international tourist arrivals have plummeted, causing a significant decline in a once thriving tourism sector. Agricultural production has faltered, and we are witnessing inefficiencies and a lack of transparency that have left us all feeling disillusioned. Not my words, but the words of the people of Tobago, from Castara to Roxborough, from Speyside to Wim. These are the cries of the average Tobagonian. As I delve deeper into the specifics of this budget response, it will become evident that the policies and actions of this current administration have led us to this point of crisis. Tobagonians must hold them accountable for their shortcomings, and we must all work assiduously and collectively to restore hope and integrity in public affairs in Tobago. Madam Presiding Officer, and I theme this budget today, unfulfilled dreams and aspirations by a failed and failing administration. Madam Presiding Officer, we must take into consideration the following, as these factors can have an enduring impact on our lives. Global considerations such as the rise in artificial intelligence, the devastating effects of climate change, the uptake of renewable energy practices, the ongoing conflicts in Russia and Ukraine and Israel and Palestine, and the upcoming elections in the United States of America can significantly affect Tobago's economy in various ways. Madam Presiding Officer, as an island, Tobago needs to look at its economic growth options, and AI can in fact boost productivity and efficiency in the industries like tourism, agriculture and services, which are vital to Tobago's economy. One such way through which the AI can function is through the creation of jobs in the information technology sector. In addition, Madam Presiding Officer, investment in AI technologies requires improved digital infrastructure, which can in fact drive economic development. As we turn to the effects of climate change on small island development states such as ours, Madam Presiding Officer, there is no doubt that Tobago's industry will suffer from climate impacts. For instance, rising sea levels and extreme weather conditions, both of which can damage, and we have seen it, our very pristine beaches and infrastructure. Furthermore, Madam Presiding Officer, the changing weather patterns will affect crop yields, thereby impacting food security and the agricultural sector. Madam Presiding Officer, it is an accepted fact that increased frequency of natural disasters place undue strain on already stretched public resources. Tobago is granted no special exemption in this regard, and this will definitely affect our ability to grow sufficient produce to sustain us as an island. In this regard, it is necessary to engage in substantial investment in resilience measures. Madam Presiding Officer, this was one of the many shortcomings of the Chief Secretary's presentations, and where he should have concentrated his energies instead of fighting with the central government. Madam Presiding Officer, I now turn to renewable energy. The island can strengthen its energy security by investing in the development of renewable projects. The nature of these projects can easily attract investment, create much-needed jobs, and reduce carbon emissions. This initiative aligns with global trends and is consistent with Sustainable Development Goal number 7, which seeks to ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. Concomitantly, Madam Presiding Officer, the net benefits will include climate change mitigation and our tourism and agricultural sectors. Madam Presiding Officer, the ongoing global conflicts such as the wars in Russia and Ukraine and Israel and Palestine will continue to impact our oil prices and the availability of food. Undoubtedly, such conflicts will have an unintended consequence for both Trinidad and Tobago and the still unitary state of Trinidad and Tobago. Furthermore, Madam Presiding Officer, elections in major developed countries such as France and the United States of America and even Guyana can lead to shifts in international policies, trade agreements, and aid programs that could potentially affect Tobago's economy. Each of these global factors, Madam Presiding Officer, interplays with local conditions influencing Tobago's economic stability, growth prospects, and overall development trajectory. Madam Presiding Officer, I now turn to the national outlook. Madam Presiding Officer, it is in its review of the economy of Trinidad and Tobago, the International Monetary Fund stated emphatically that under this central government administration, Madam Presiding Officer, as we all know, it is a PNM-led central government administration. Trinidad and Tobago is experiencing significant economic recovery for the first time in a decade, with the economy continuing to recover while inflation remains low. Banks' credits is expanding, and the financial sector appears sound and stable. This is also supported by Moody's Investor Services' latest upgrade from positive to stable, dated 20th of June 2024. The current account is in surplus, and international reserve coverage is adequate. The fiscal position in 2023 was better than budgeted, with public debt remaining below the authorities' softer debt target. Real GDP is estimated to have expanded by 2.1% in 2023, driven by a strong performance in the non-energy sector. Inflation has declined sharply, mainly due to the decelerating global and imported goods food prices. Economic growth is projected to gain momentum in 2024, supported by both the non-energy sector and the energy sectors, with inflation expected to remain low. The current account surplus will narrow, estimated at 5.7% of GDP in 2024, mainly due to a decline in energy prices and energy exports. In 2022, Madam Presiding Officer, GDP grew by 1.5% and was estimated to be 2.1% in 2023, with projections indicating a further increase to 2.4% in 2024. The energy sector is expected to benefit from the recent startup of some projects and others anticipated in the coming months, which could boost output. However, the sector still faces challenges, including constrained gas supplies and the natural decline in production rates at mature hydrocarbon-producing wells in the short to medium term. Headline inflation is expected to remain low in 2024. Assuming no fresh external shocks, particularly in the energy markets or from conflict-related shipping problems, keeping imported inflation will be fairly low. Madam Presiding Officer, I now turn to Tobago's specific economic profile. Madam Presiding Officer, the narrative as expressed in this year's budget presentation is clearly designed to make unintelligible the specific achievements as they relate to the specific proposals as reflected in the Public Sector Investment Program, PSIP, in 2024. Madam Presiding Officer, what they have sought to do, and quite disingenuously so, is to mask the lack of specific achievements in fiscal 2024 by regurgitating dubious achievements since they assumed office. The legitimate question that arises, therefore, is, were there any significant achievements in the last fiscal year? And the answer is none, because the data suggests otherwise. The Chief Secretary noted that the state sector continues to dominate Tobago's economy, accounting for 45% of Tobago's GDP in 2023. This ratio is an indicator of the state's productivity. This ratio puts the productive index of Tobago well below 1%. Madam Presiding Officer, the least productive part of the state is the THA administration. Madam Presiding Officer, let me repeat that for those in the back. The least productive area of the state is the Tobago House of Assembly administration. And the least productive part of Tobago is the state sector. We have to look towards the THA as the main driver of growth. We are experiencing low growth due to the low productivity of the Tobago House of Assembly. The budget statement provides no explanation for the problem and no capacity to address it. There's a misunderstanding of what is going on in Tobago's economy. And as you know, anyone who goes to the doctor, if the doctor misdiagnoses, then they will misprescribe. And therefore, until this administration demonstrates the capacity to understand what are the real challenges facing Tobago, we will continue to have the failure that we are witnessing today. We, as the PNM, had already begun and embarked on being the greatest little island on the planet, just to borrow the Chief Secretary's phrase. In fact, I don't go on sinking ships at all. Madam Presiding Officer, and it is a fact, when we handed the economy to you, the rate we are going puts us near being called, nowhere being called the greatest little island. The Chief Secretary continued that, and I really want to take some time, Madam Presiding Officer, for us to understand the numbers, because the Chief Secretary glossed over the numbers. And he went on to say that finance, insurance, real estate, and business services contributed about 27%, while tourism added about 13%. Transport, storage, and communication accounted for approximately 4%, as did construction and quarrying, with agriculture and manufacturing contributing about 2%. Previously, he stated that the most recent survey of business establishments in Tobago suggested that Tobago's GDP at constant prices rose from 1.6 billion in 2022 to 1.66 billion in 2023, thereby attempting to posit that there was growth of 1%. And the Chief Secretary, in his wind-up, I would like him to tell the people of Tobago whether that data set is in fact completed, whether in fact that survey that you referred to was completed, because he neither said it was provisional or a completed document. And therefore, for us to appreciate the credibility of the information, we would like the Chief Secretary to report on where did he get the data, how he got the data, and is it complete data. But, Madam Presiding Officer, accepting the data as it is, what is instructive is that by their own admission, they inherited a GDP from the PNM administration of over $1.68 billion. Now, if you inherited a GDP of $1.68 billion in 2021, and 2 years later, you are saying that the GDP is $1.6 billion, even a primary school student, and my dear godson in the gallery, would discern that that is in fact a decline. This is a massive admission of failure the Chief Secretary failed to accept and tell the people of Tobago. If you move from 1.68 billion to 1.66 billion, how could you say you are doing better than what you inherited? You are actually, in fact, doing worse. We built the economy after COVID. We took it in 2021. Don't lie on COVID. Do not lie on COVID. The PNM showed you how to restart an economy after COVID, and that is why we were able to move the economy from 1.61 billion to 1.68 billion, a 4.2% increase. That is governance. That is leadership. That is management, PNM style. But unfortunately, Madam Presiding Officer, as I stated before, the administration documents that their survey of business establishment provides a record that we produced 1.66 billion in 2023. Madam Presiding Officer, to measure the GDP purely from the establishment survey side of the ledger is inadequate. This is the supply side. One also needs to know what households are doing, because one needs to estimate consumption. One needs to estimate investment. One needs to estimate exports, imports, and of course, government spending. This is on the demand side. Madam Presiding Officer, for the avoidance of doubt, GDP estimates use three approaches: output, expenditure, and income. Data for GDP estimates are sourced from survey and administrative sources, which are used in the compilation of individual components of GDP. The question then arises, Madam Presiding Officer, What is the growth rate we have to achieve to get out of this mess we are in? If you say we grew last year by 1%, how does that describe Tobago's growth rate? In other words, Madam Presiding Officer, the Farley-led administration has in fact engineered the collapse of the economy over the last 2.5 years. This is indeed a case of trying to use statistics to paint a positive picture when in fact the opposite is the case. This is yet another instance of the trifling petty politics of the Tobago People Party. Madam Presiding Officer, I am certain that you are aware that the average GDP per capita of Tobago is approximately 3,500 US, significantly behind that of Trinidad, which stands at approximately 1,500 US per capita. Therefore, a realistic growth rate in the next 30 years will allow us to be somewhere around 12,000 US per capita. To achieve this, the Tobago economy would need a consistent growth rate of 7% just to have a state like the national economy growth rate of 7% in Trinidad, and of course for us to play catch up. Starting from a growth rate of 4.2%, as I mentioned, this was the legacy that the previous PNM administration handed over to your administration. It is easier to get to 7% rather than starting from the negative 1% at which Tobago currently stands. Madam Presiding Officer, given our size, it is easier to get to 7% faster or even surpass this figure. Just imagine if we were able to double the performance of 2021, that 4.2%, and get that up to approximately 8.4% of the Tobago economy is likely to get to a position of over US $23,000 per capita in 30 years, with the potential to surpass our counterparts in Trinidad. And what all this means for the layman is that the people at Tobago will have more money in their pocket to spend, and all of us can live as kings and princesses and princes on our beautiful island, and that is when we can boast and say Tobago is in fact the greatest little island on the planet. This, however, requires, Madam Presiding Officer, I read my book, Power of Hope, while they presented. Can they please allow me to present in silence? And I read the Power of Hope because people lack hope at this time. And therefore, Madam Presiding Officer, I come with a message of hope today to the people of Tobago. You have no business reversing our growth rate, which stood at 4.2%. We gave that to you on a platter, and all you had to do is take it and run with it. In fact, you are receiving more money than we had when we gave you 4.2% growth rate. That is the reality. And yet, even with more money, you are actually, in fact, producing less. It means it is 2% of more hardship on the people of Tobago. It means that there's a population of Tobago that is unable to participate in Tobago's economy at this time. It means there's a population of Tobago that is unable to even benefit from the opportunities that are available at this time. Because, Madam Presiding Officer, it is no unknown fact that this administration has already inherited and spent over $7 billion. And if you do the calculation, I ask them to pull out their calculator. If you do that spend by the 60,000 people residing in Tobago, that is an average of over $1.2 million that every Tobagonian would have received. It means that in essence, every Tobagonian should really be a millionaire, down to the last child. Because if you take per capita what we have received and apply it properly across, it would have redounded to the benefit of the people of Tobago. But that isn't so, because it's mismanagement, it's misbehavior in public office, and it is about selfish grandeur. It's about people looking for an opportunity, using the public purse for their own private business and private benefit. Madam Presiding Officer, I wish to move on, and I wish to raise a very important point at this time. I say to this House today and to the members opposite, had we, the PNM, continued in governance, we would have demonstrated that we have the capacity, because we have done it before, that we are smart enough, that we have the experience, and that we would have been able to double this growth in the current circumstances, because we are receiving more allocation. Where, for example, at the level of the central government, and it is demonstrated at the national level, the central government at this time, under the astute leadership of Dr. Keith Rowley, even the IMF has pointed to sustained growth. That is a fact. So while we are growing at the national level under the leadership of the People's National Movement, the economy in Tobago is actually shrinking under the leadership for the member of Paltivy Lands for Me, Speyside. So you have the national economy going up, and then you have the Tobago economy going down. Go and tell IMF that. We would even have been poised to see in our lifetime an economy that surpasses the growth of the national economy. That is where we were heading. Madam Presiding Officer, the Chief Secretary in his budget contribution engaged in what can only be described as intellectual dishonesty by failing to alert Tobagonians that the Tobago economy is actually in a decline from 2022 to 2023. And he had in fact presided over the programs and policies that this administration has put in place over those last 2 years, which only generated a negative 1.1% growth. I wish to repeat, Madam Presiding Officer, while the Chief Secretary attempted to paint a rosy picture of an insignificant growth of 1% between the fiscal year 2022 and 2023, the Chief Secretary failed. He failed, Madam Presiding Officer, to admit to Tobagonians that the economy recorded a cumulative growth of negative 1% for the last 2 years. The question, therefore, Madam Presiding Officer, is how can people understand this information and still believe that continuing with this regime is the right move? Madam Presiding Officer, I was always told that the definition of madness is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. And if they have failed 2022, they have failed 2023, and the outlook is that because they came back with the same presentation, that they're going to fail 2024, how could we allow Tobago to continue to go down in this abyss? Madam Presiding Officer, I don't mean any pun intended. Madam Presiding Officer, what produced this decline? Madam Presiding Officer, this decline was produced by what they did. Let's therefore examine their record, and let's evaluate as Tobagonians if what they did should continue. See, Madam Presiding Officer, we need to understand the economy in Tobago in order to devise effective policies. This is integral to the economic process. They caused a 2% decline in 2022. We are still not nowhere close to where we were in 2019, nor in 2021, when the administration of Tobago was handed over to them. They have failed, Madam Presiding Officer, to provide the people of Tobago with the reasons as to why we are here. So let me do it for them. Let me take a look at their accomplishments, because it is their accomplishments that have led us to a 1.1% decline. And I want to interrogate the numbers a bit more, because numbers don't lie, people do. Right, the member for Palliative Lands for me, Speyside. Madam Presiding Officer, the administration claims that tourism, defined as the sum of distribution and accommodation, accounts for 13% of the economy. However, upon closer inspection, we find that this figure is in fact misleading. In 2022, distribution and restaurants accounted for about 10.32%, while hotels and guest houses, which can truly be called tourism, only accounted for a meager 3.61%. How many tourists do we really bring to consume the services of distribution, especially when the numbers are declining? Most local tourists bring their own supplies. So those people coming from Trinidad, a lot of them pack their cars, put in their trunks, food and all of that. So that means the impact on local distribution is minimal. And in fact, most of the distribution that is happening for domestic consumption, that is, people who reside right here in Tobago. Therefore, the real contribution of tourism to our economy is much less than 13%, as they are claiming. In fact, it is more likely to be around 7%. This misrepresentation skews the perception of Tobago's economy under this hapless administration. Because if you are to listen to them, they would tell you we have a tourism-driven economy. But if you are to look at the numbers, as I said, numbers don't lie, people do. And if you are to look at the numbers, if we are saying the real GDP out of tourism is about 7%, then what Tobago really have as an economy is a government-based, government-dominated economy. What the above underscores, and indeed challenges as well, is the reliability of the data presented by the Chief Secretary, and whether the data used by him in his presentation are in fact substantiated by the Central Statistical Office. Madam Presiding Officer, you are quite aware that 1.1% below, they are currently 1.1% below where the PNM was 2.5 years ago. You need to compare the statistics with when the administration of Tobago Affairs was handed to you in 2021. That should be a base, rather than trying to hoodwink the people by using 2022 as your base. You need to say where you start the race from. You started it at 4.2%, and when you got that baton, you then slowed down. That is what it is saying. You slowed down and you are losing the race. Everybody's passing you. Grenada passing you. St. Lucia passing you. St. Vincent passing you. You have slowed down the Tobago economy. Madam Presiding Officer, it is common knowledge that the construction sector is the most important sector to capital investment, along with education. If the collapse between 2021 and 2023 involves construction, it is important to lay out how are you going to recover the sector. We have heard a little about that. What are you going to do to rebuild the sector and lead the development of Tobago's economy? And Madam Presiding Officer, I want to advise the Chief Secretary to follow through with his decision to relieve the Secretary of Works of that portfolio, because the longer he stays there, the deeper he will embroil you in his shenanigans. You need to stand up to him, Chief Secretary. I know you're a strong man, rather than cower in fear. What does he have on you? Chief Secretary, I know you're strong. I know you're plain spoken. How could one man have you so beholden? You need to remind him that it is you. You need to remind him that it's you who bear the mantle of Chief Secretary, not him. Despite what his handlers in Trinidad down south may tell him. Madam Presiding Officer, in 2022, Tobago's labor force comprised 32,000 of the 594,600 persons in the national labor market, representing about 5%. By the end of 2023, the labor force in Tobago had decreased by 2.5% to 31,200 persons. Total employment in Tobago fell to 30,500, which is a loss of about 700 jobs, or about 2.2%. Consequently, Tobago's share of total employment declined by 5%. This decline has negatively impacted the national labor force by negative 0.2%. The reduction, and this, I want to go slow, because when you take 700 people out of the Tobago labor market in a small society as ours, this reduction in labor force participation really is affecting about 2,800 Tobagonians. And if you want to know why, because the globally accepted formula in terms of person to household contribution is that one employee, one worker, in fact, impacts a household of about 4 persons. And if we are to accept that globally recognized standard, then it means that for every unemployed person in Tobago, you are in fact discriminating against 4 Tobagonians. And if you apply 700 of those Tobagonians who are currently unemployed, you are in fact impacting upon the lives of 2,800 persons. The reason the unemployment rate is also around 3%, because the Chief Secretary boasts of that, and that is commendable. Any society would appreciate an unemployment rate of 3%, because that represents full employment. But it is because when Tobagonians are displaced, when they cannot find opportunities, they quickly leave the island. So yes, it may reflect a 3%, but the amount of young Tobagonians that this current administration is driving out of Tobago, it is alarming, Madam Presiding Officer, and it is shown through this data. 700 Tobagonians not being able to find a place, not being able to find opportunities. And Madam Presiding Officer, you know what is the most hurtful part of this? When you look around this horseshoe, it is being managed by young people. And that is why young people gave them an opportunity, because young people felt that here it is. We will finally have an administration in their minds that looks like us, understands us, and will bring forth the policies that will benefit us. And unfortunately, that has been an abject failure. And that is why young people are leaving Tobago in droves. Madam Presiding Officer, and I can speak to some of them: Community Liaison Unit, Rural Development Unit, Monitoring and Evaluation Unit, CPEP, and TATCO. I recognize I'm not seeing the henchwoman here, but I want to tell you, karma is real. You hench a number of people, but it seems your day of reckoning has finally come. This trend is seen across various divisions. Madam Presiding Officer, that is why many persons were happy to hear the Chief Secretary indicate that this budget presentation would focus on human capital development. Alas, the people of Tobago have been let down yet again by the dishonesty of this Chief Secretary utterings. A review of available data shows that while Tobago's economy lost jobs, Trinidad added new jobs to its economy. In the absence of new job creation in Tobago, those who cannot find employment tend to withdraw from the labor force, as I said. Madam Presiding Officer, I'll move on with some more statistics. In 2022, the government-dominated community social and personal services sector provided 14,400 jobs, which increased to 14,800 jobs in 2023. In contrast, the corresponding sector in Trinidad saw a decline from 38% in 2022 to 36% in 2023. Despite a decline in total employment in Tobago, 71% of paid employees depended on the government for employment in 2023. up from 65% in 2022. And some people may say, well, the government employing people. But what this data really suggests is quite troubling, because you will recall that it was the Chief Secretary himself that told Tobago, Trinidad and Tobago, and the wide world that the THA workforce was too large. And here it is, in 2024, under the leadership of this Chief Secretary, the THA workforce actually growing from 65% to 71%, while the private sector in Tobago is actually shrinking from 35% to 29%. So you are killing the private sector while you are inflating the public sector. Madam Presiding Officer, you will recall the opposition criticized the size of the THA workforce. That is a fact. Yet now in government, we see an increase in government dependency for employment. And most of them is not sustainable employment. It is 10 on, 10 off. That is what they believe our people, our young people of Tobago is worth. Giving them, like how they were just giving them a bread with no butter, with no sausage, with no cheese. They don't see Tobagonians as worthy of anything good. Imagine every Tobagonian, really, you all owe every Tobagonian at least $1.1 million in goods and services. That is what this $7 billion is disaggregated to. Every Tobagonian should be able to benefit from healthcare, from jobs, from social assistance, and whatever the economy has to offer, to the tune of over $1 million. But here you are, giving them scrums, while you and your friends in South, you all go down on weekend and enjoy a good meal. And that cannot be it for the people of Tobago. That cannot be acceptable. All the popping bottles while Tobagonians eating grass. Madam Presiding Officer, in conclusion, the data reflects a troubling trend of job losses and economic stagnation in Tobago. We must take decisive action to reverse these trends, create sustainable employment, and reduce dependency on government jobs. Only then we can foster a thriving, balanced economy that benefits all Tobagonians. And Madam Presiding Officer, just to confirm, I am going to confirm this disaggregation of $7 billion. Because if you look at, and you hear this administration saying they are being underfunded, but if you do the comparator, you will recognize that in 2021-2022, the THA received $2.134 billion. In 2022-2023, the THA received $2.36 billion. In 2023-2024, the THA received $2.52 billion. Madam Presiding Officer, any little child could see that what you are getting year on year is an increase. So yes, we know there would always be a demand for more in Tobago, always. And I will be with all of Tobago in standing up and say, yes, we should get more. But you cannot come to tell Tobagonians that you are being somehow treated worse than, when the data shows, it clearly demonstrates that you are in fact being treated better than. Because if in 2021, 2022, under the previous PNM administration, our allocation was $2.134 billion, and then you come and get an increase of over $200 million, and then on top of that, the next year come and get a further increase of $200 million, it tells me that you are in fact getting even more favorable accommodation and allocation. And Madam Presiding Officer, what is even more interesting, during those period of the PNM regime, during the challenging times of 2015 to 2021, that administration had to manage Tobago affairs with receiving the allocation month to month. Sometimes I understand it was late at month. But this administration and Chief Secretary boasted. He came right in this house and boasted how he was able to get the Minister of Finance to do what the former Secretary of Finance could not. And he declared that he is now receiving finances more favorable than what the previous administration was receiving. In fact, he said he was getting it 2 months in advance and the third month on the third month of requirement. So in fact, that is at least you have some legway, some leeway, some lead time in terms of planning. The previous administration had to pay as you go, but at least you have something in the kitty to manage. And even now, you are recording more challenges because you are paying people late, you are unable to meet your payments to suppliers, and the economy is actually declining. So you have better, more money, more favorable terms, yet you are able to reflect and to, in fact, stimulate the Tobago economy to the point that we can see some growth. What we are seeing under you is, in fact, decline. Failure, failure, failure. And just to put it into perspective, the THA, previous PNM THA, spent $40 billion and over 20 years and built hospital, playgrounds, schools, community centers, health centers, assist thousands of Tobagonians to go and educate themselves. You name it, $40 billion in 20 years, which is an average spend of over $1.9 billion. So 1.9 billion on average for 40 years. You know how much this administration over their 3-year life, by the time they come around to September, they would have gotten about 6.991 billion, which really amounts to about $2.3 billion per year. It means, therefore, if you are to do the detailed analysis, they are in fact getting on average $400 million more to spend. And with $400 million more to spend on average, they have in fact produced less. That is what the data has shown us. You have produced less with more. And in fact, the PNM have produced more with less. That is what the data is showing. And if you are to choose managers, Tobago, who would you choose? You have an administration that has received more and produced less, and you have an administration that would have received less and produced more. That is what will be in front of the people of Tobago to choose coming in the next election, because they now have a record. The member for Roxborough brought to us babies. We didn't know if they could walk, if they could crawl, but now we see them stumbling all over themselves, and they're chubby. So they're overweight because they're eating plenty. Watch them. They're fat. Eating off the fat of the land. While people suffer in Tobago. Madam Presiding Officer, I want to spend some time on education. We have, yeah, so we're good. 18, all right. Madam Presiding Officer, I want to spend some time on education. And Madam Presiding Officer, the Chief Secretary from inception has been talking incessantly about transparency and accountability. In this regard, let us examine his administration's stewardship in the field of education. After approximately 2.5 years, the Assistant Secretary, whom I'm not seeing today, someone trained in the primary sector, has been nonchalantly removed from the division. Why is this, Madam Presiding Officer? Wasn't he performing? Is the division more efficiently managed today? Is the division stronger than before? And is the division more efficiently managed now that he's gone? Is it that there was too much internecine warfare existing? Madam President, I'm not going to give way.
No, it's not to give way. I'm just going to caution you about your
I'm just asking questions, Madam Presiding Officer. I'm not
minority.
imputing any motive.
Minority leader, have a seat. Leader of Assembly Business.
What is a standing order? What is she rising on?
I'm just going to caution you on your terminologies.
Okay.
Please be guided accordingly. Continue.
Stand guided, Madam Presiding Officer. Stand guided. Madam Presiding Officer, what is the explanation? On the face of it, given the current challenges facing our kindergarten and primary schools in particular, removing someone who has experience at that level undoubtedly leaves a void in the administration of that sector. Very experienced member in the education fraternity. What is overtly discomforting is there is only an absentee landlord now available to lead and oversee the work of the division. Madam Presiding Officer, in light of the wishful budgeted estimates for the division, the people of Tobago, including the Tobagonian child, they are asking, what is the objective situation with the kindergarten sector? Are you aware, Madam Presiding Officer, that there are communities without public early childhood care and education centers, women surrounding communities, Black Rock, and my information tells me even Golden Lane, to name a few, are some of the communities without public ECC centers. Additionally, what is the situation in respect of large communities such as Mason Hall, Canaan, Bonaccord, and even Roxborough? Madam Presiding Officer, in some of these areas where there are no public ECC centers, a well-meaning individual may start a private one because of the need that exists. As noteworthy as this is, implications include inter alia, quality of leadership, execution of the pertinent curriculum and the appropriate physical structure with facilities for play and exercise. Madam Presiding Officer, what is the situation regarding staffing of these schools, both public and private? Are you aware that the appropriate ratio is 1 teacher to 15 students? Many of these centers are understaffed. Castara crowded, Signal Hill crowded, Mason Hall crowded. In the same vein, there is currently 1 supervisor to monitor and oversee the execution of the curriculum of both the public and private ECC centers. Madam Presiding Officer, it is instructive that when the PNM administration left office, there were 2 supervisors. So again, we have regressed. We have moved from 2 to 1. The administration must then find a way to fix this. After 2.5 years in office, this lack of performance is synonymous with failure. After all, the tagline in their 2024 PSIP was putting people first, nurturing our greatest asset. And we remember when they were PDP before they transformed to QTP, they always talk about people before politics. Now it's their interests before people. In her contribution, I trust that the Secretary will provide this House with the necessary updates. Madam Presiding Officer, I turn to the primary sector. I note that the Tobago District Assessment Initiative started under the last PNM administration has been continued. And for that, Madam Presiding Officer, I wish to commend the leaders of the education fraternity. But Madam Presiding Officer, I am very concerned, and again, Madam Presiding Officer, using as a point of my departure, their dubious narrative about putting people first, nurturing the greatest asset, I ask the following. What has happened to the Teachers Development Center at Madden House? This was a center designed to provide opportunities for the continual professional development of our teachers, underpinned by the use of the internet and other technologies. The concept was one where best practices in pedagogy, inclusive of resource planning, would be developed and shared among teaching practitioners on the island. Both the curriculum officers and then instructional coaches made judicious use of this facility. Just so, Madam Presiding Officer, under the leadership of this current Secretary of Education, Research and Technology, it gone, disbanded. Is anything happening at THTI, Madam Presiding Officer? Is the idea of the University of Tobago dead? And if any greater tribute could be paid to the late Dr. Murray, Winston Murray, it would be to honor his lifelong dream to see that of a University of Tobago. So I note you are naming a road, but if you are serious about honoring the legacy of Dr. Winston Murray, then perhaps you will pay some attention in ensuring that vision of a University of Tobago is realized. Because I would remember, and may I remind this House, that the last administration was able to enter into collaborative arrangement with the University of Trinidad and Tobago to transfer its operations from the TLH building to the THTI campus, allowing for the collection of rental income. Madam Presiding Officer, I am advised that that UTT is no longer a tenant at the THTI campus. They have terminated the arrangement. Furthermore, an undergrad program in civil engineering and a diploma program in agriculture were undertaken right there at the THTI campus. Additionally, Kendall Farm School was to be upgraded and integrated with THTI to provide opportunities for practical training and development of farmers here in Tobago, as well as attracting students from abroad. Madam Presiding Officer, the THA, in collaboration with the University of West Indies, agreed to the transition of the Scarborough General Hospital to a teaching hospital. There was a soft launch just before the COVID-19 pandemic for the introduction of a postgraduate training program for our doctors right here in Tobago. The program would have involved the following specialties: surgery, anesthesia, emergency room medicine, internal medicine, and psychiatry. The long-term vision included radiology and hematology. The division introduced a construction program for anyone interested in the construction industry. The areas were plumbing, carpentry, masonry, and electrical installation. At best, Madam Presiding Officer, it was a 3-month program for persons who had already had the skill level and were to be schooled basically in the theoretical constructs. Those without basic skill sets would have undertaken the program in 9 months. Persons were then evaluated at both levels 1 and 2 in the National Education Council certification program. The above represented initiatives that were undertaken by the past administration, all of which seem to have been abandoned. Yet they come here and they boast about nurturing our greatest asset. So, Madam Presiding Officer, I will pay some time now on reflecting on what they have in fact nurtured. Madam Presiding Officer, since the Chief Secretary began his presentation by sharing some reflections on the dubious successes, to illustrate the fact that not only has the economy collapsed, but that the stewardship of the Secretary of Education leaves much to be desired. Let us continue those reflections. And I would start at 2022. And I'm using their own words, Madam Presiding Officer, their own promises, their own unfulfilled promises. Completion, Madam Presiding Officer. When did the construction of Scarborough Secondary School begin? Because in 2022, they highlighted that there would be the completion of Scarborough Secondary School. They also said development and design for a new school for children with disabilities. That was in 2022. We have heard nothing, nada. Conversion of Roxborough Secondary into a vocational school. Not even designs have been completed, I've been told. Reassessment of school nutrition program. Nothing. Probably stuck at the committee stage. In 2023, Madam Presiding Officer, they told us that they will be upgrading schools towards smart school specifications. What is the status? Zilch, zero. They said, again, they returned to us with Scarborough Sec, and they said commencement of construction work at Scarborough Secondary School. Madam Presiding Officer, I just want to crave your indulgence, because after the completion of the Scarborough Secondary School in 2022, how could you begin pre-construction work in 2023? I guess that is logic and planning 101 by this administration. Then, January 2024, ops, turning, no design still, no funds identified. And Madam Presiding Officer, this is in fact a breach of the office of the OPR law, because the OPR law states that you must identify the line of funding before you can start engaging. Madam Presiding Officer, I expect the trend as outlined above, where they put out these dubious plans and then you have precious nothing. Madam Presiding Officer, in summary, what has emerged is that several projects, particularly the completion of Scarborough Secondary School and the conversion of Roxborough Secondary, have been repeated in this budget. In respect of the former, Madam Presiding Officer, there was a sub-turning at the proposed Bacolet site. To what end, Madam Presiding Officer? 6 months later, no sign of construction. Are there even architectural designs for the school? Have they done a topographical survey? Madam Presiding Officer, this is leadership and management by VAPs. This certainly is not reflective of an administration that is organized and systematic in terms of planning and execution. In respect of the latter, given the approach of this administration, conversion into a vocational institution seems to be light years away. Who really are the beneficiaries of the impact program, Madam Presiding Officer? Do you know the answer to this? How does this program differ from its predecessors? What evidence is there to demonstrate that there is a superior that this is a superior program? What metrics are being measured to assess its success? Are there transparent reports available? After 2 years, we are still in the dark as to the viability of this program and what impact, if any, it has had on the students. Madam Presiding Officer, my information is that the only person this program is impacting is the pockets of the Secretary's technical advisor. Given the digital divide, especially in rural areas, how feasible is the rollout of IT infrastructure and online learning? Are there provisions for training teachers and students to use these technologies effectively? With a significant budget allocated to safety plans, what innovative approaches will be employed to address school violence and indiscipline? Are there sustainable funding sources for these initiatives, or are they heavily reliant on fluctuating government budgets? Madam Presiding Officer, interestingly, perusal of the plans by the Secretary of Education demonstrates that they are clothed with flowery and vague descriptions, rather than being smart. And I know my good friend, the Deputy Chief Secretary, always speaks about smart objectives. So are they specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound? And as I said, a favorite mantra of those on the other side when they were in the minority. I now turn to this notion of the Tobago-centric curriculum. Madam Presiding Officer, listening to the Education Secretary since assuming office, one would think that this notion of Tobago-centric curriculum is either the 8th wonder of the world or the best thing since kissed sliced bread. As usual, a beautiful sounding phrase, but clearly an idea yet not properly thought out. What is this concept really about? What does it mean? In the budget speech, we heard for the first time a brief statement of intent, and I quote, "For fiscal 2025, we propose to incrementally and strategically infuse selected aspects of Tobago's history, culture, heritage, and geopolitics as part of our Tobago-centric curriculum rollout." Madam Presiding Officer, if the definition means a focus on curriculum that relates to our history, culture, and traditions, much room already exists in our social studies curriculum, and that can in fact be integrated. You don't need to create a whole new area or a whole new program to integrate Tobago's history, Tobago's culture, Tobago's traditions. Social studies involves the integration of a range of subjects and experiences: personal and social education, citizenship, health education, critical thinking, communication and technological skills, history, geography, political science, and economics. This social studies framework synthesizes these separate unique viewpoints into one interdisciplinary subject consisting of selected concepts, skills, values, and attitudes, which are presented to the students through studies of topics. Teachers generally develop these topics into units of study that are appropriate to the children's needs, the school, and its locality. So why reinvent the wheel? Madam Presiding Officer, the above suggests that there should be an emphasis on integration and the use of an interdisciplinary approach rather than a discrete one on what is really relevant for the students of Tobago. Madam Presiding Officer, every aspect of the history, culture, and traditions of Tobago can be explored through social studies, theater arts, dance, drama, music, language arts and creative writing, science, mathematics, and agriculture. Students can be engaged in projects, oral and written presentations, digital recordings, and other forms of research tools and activities appropriate to their age and grade level. As a matter of fact, Madam Presiding Officer, the experiences and learnings gained through this integrated approach can be used for participation in the Tobago Heritage Festival, exhibitions in schools and community centers, libraries, and other spaces throughout Tobago. Madam Presiding Officer, is it that the Secretary for the Division of Education is unaware that with the appropriate planning, relevant elements of Tobago's history, culture, etc., can be neatly integrated into teaching learning activities through a project-centric approach, an approach that has at its core or foundation a method of teaching children through project investigations characterized by a flexible framework and a methodology that includes content which is interdisciplinary and student-centered. The simple fact of the matter, Madam Presiding Officer, selective elements of Tobago's history and heritage are currently infused in the delivery of the official curriculum, particularly through the discipline of social studies. Madam Presiding Officer, how is this new curriculum expected to fit into and be aligned with the current national curriculum? What are the implications for our students' summative exams? For example, SEA and CSEC, which are national, regional, and international in scope. It must be noted that our students are already struggling with the existing curriculum. So why do we want to add an additional curriculum? Are we educating students only for Tobago? Or are we educating our students to live in a regional and global world? Madam Presiding Officer, I now turn to the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries, and Urban Development. And Madam Presiding Officer, in all truth, so much has already been said about the division with this responsibility and its secretary. As a matter of fact, Madam Presiding Officer, go anywhere from Bel-Air in Charlottesville to Crusoe Drive in Crown Point, and you will hear the same refrain from Tobagonians. As a matter of fact, If you ask the Trinidadians, Venezuelans, Vincentians, or Grenadians on the island, you will all hear them singing the same refrain. Incompetent, clueless, callous, disrespectful, arrogant, and the number one descriptor, corrupt. Madam Presiding Officer, these are not my words, but those of the Tobago public that is exhausted and worn out from the chronic mismanagement and chronicles of ineptitude they have to endure every Monday morning, whether it's yet another injunction or yet another bacchanal. To make bad matters worse, Madam Presiding Officer, the Chief Secretary decided he will just place the two bad eggs in one box and hope that they somehow cancel out each other. Madam Presiding Officer, during his presentation, the Chief Secretary began by reflecting, but it seems as though his memory, like his administration, has failed him. Madam Presiding Officer, although the Chief Secretary may pretend to have or may have forgotten, the people of Tobago will never forget. Remember when the $300 million in development funds that were meant for the benefit of the people of Tobago were spirited away, amigos del sur, friends of the South, spirited away down south. Meanwhile, Madam Presiding Officer, the construction sector in Tobago has suffered and grounded to a halt, leading to widespread hardship on the island, mass layoffs, no jobs for the average man, no work, only hardship, hunger, pain, and sorrow. Madam Presiding Officer, and I always say it, crime is a social problem. But while it is a social problem, and while you should not use poverty as an excuse for crime, the correlation between the two is inescapable. Just look at the desolation and destruction caused by this administration and compare the climbing crime rate on the island. Madam Presiding Officer, it is indeed a sad and unfortunate state of affairs. Madam Presiding Officer, the Chief Secretary has come to the people now in his budget statement, listing priorities and attempting to give the impression that they are going to create the very jobs that they themselves took away. Madam Presiding Officer, it is a sad and thinly veiled plot, as this administration, drunk with power, is all about trying to secure the votes that they abandoned. It is all about fooling the young people into believing that they care. Fooling Tobagonians believing they have a plan. But the smoke is clearing, and Tobagonians are saying it everywhere, every day. Fool me once, shame on you. But fool me twice, shame on me. Madam Presiding Officer, based on the utterances of the Chief Secretary, all Tobagonians can hope for is more make work, more temporary jobs. After dismissing hundreds of workers from sustainable employment, they now offer 10 on, 10 off make work program, as well as employment on small projects that will clearly last a small amount of time and reflect small or modest pay. Madam Presiding Officer, this Secretary and this administration want to take Tobago back 40 years. That was the days of our foreparents, our fathers and our grandparents. Madam Presiding Officer, 40 years ago is the last time 10 on, 10 off was a thing. And I remember, even I can attest, the first job I got as a young person was at 10 on, 10 off with special works. And I remember the kind of suffocation it was, because when you work 10 on, 10 off, you have to go down by works for paymaster, sometimes paymaster take whole day to reach on the Friday. And this is what this administration want to take Tobagonians back to. And taking Tobagonians back to that time, at least in that time, Tobagonians were receiving little. But now in a time where Tobagonians are receiving more, why do you want to give Tobagonians pittance? Tobagonians are kings and queens. And if you are saying to the Tobagonians that you in fact reside on the greatest little island on the planet, then everybody must in fact enjoy the spoils, the benefit that comes with living on the greatest little island on the planet. How could you live in paradise and catching your royal nene? Or you could live in paradise and can't get food to eat, can't get a food card. When you apply, taking months. When you drive along the roads, it's pothole there, pothole here, pothole everywhere. How could we call this the greatest little island when you have not made it the greatest little island? It is us, the people who the Tobagonians entrust with this responsibility to make Tobago the greatest little island. It is not just a statement. It is by deliberate actions and plans and systems and programs. You don't just become the greatest little island by shouting the greatest little island. You have to do the work. Madam Presiding Officer, I want to also remind this administration that is glaring that when all of a sudden there was a carnival and roads needed to build as an emergency, Tobagonians didn't hear one peep about employment opportunities. When the 300 million was being spent in a hurry, there was no talk about jobs for Tobagonians. But now that the projects are not so big and their southern friends are now filled, Tobagonians are now being remembered. Now we're seeing RFP telling Tobagonians come and sign up as small contractor and small and medium size and micro. So the small thing for Tobago, the scraps, but the big things for your friends South Trinidad. Madam Presiding Officer, but I can tell them something. Don't worry. Tobagonians might not be loud and rowdy, but they will certainly remember. Madam Presiding Officer, Tobagonians will remember the disastrous Friendship Connector Road. And as we speak, the reason why it is disastrous Friendship Connector Road, Madam Presiding Officer, because just today it was brought to my attention, a road that is not yet even open, completed, not yet even commissioned, is falling apart. The road, as we speak, is disintegrating after $70 million of Tobagonian money being spirited away to their friends. The road is already breaking away. That is the legacy of the member for Scarborough Mount Grace and the member for Palliative Lands for Me, Speyside. That is your legacy. Madam Presiding Officer, Tobagonians will remember the contractor that was blacklisted because he spoke out against his name being used to justify the lack of transparency in the procurement process. Madam Presiding Officer, Tobagonians will remember that every Monday morning a new injunction popped up. Madam Presiding Officer, Tobagonians will remember the disrespect and the disregard for environment and our laws. Madam Presiding Officer, Tobagonians will remember the road that should have been a dual carriageway that was going to be built and paid for by the central government, only to be used by Tobago scarce resources, and now is breaking apart. Madam Presiding Officer, Tobagonians will remember that instead of giving the California man $100 million, we could have built Scarborough Secondary School already. We could have fixed Bad Rock. We could have fixed Turpin Bend. And we would have still have money to continue to commence other road paving initiatives. But all Tobagonians are getting again is crumbs. Patch, patch here, patch, patch there, patch, 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 like Raggedy Ann and Andy. That is all we're getting. Patch. Plaster in the roads. That is all we're getting. No paving. We're not getting paving again, innit? Member for Roxborough, paving done. All we're getting is patching. Patch, 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 patch. That is the legacy of this administration. Madam Presiding Officer, what is even more embarrassing is that at the rate they are going, the new airport terminal will be completed and that very connector road that is breaking apart will still be under construction. Madam Presiding Officer, even if a secret deal to be made to ensure the connector road could go through the Tobago local road is hatched, there exists no plans on how it will be connected to the airport. And ultimately, Tobagonians, I showed you the original plan, international dual carriageway road. Tobagonians for the first time would have benefited from two-lane roads. We don't see that in Tobago. There was an instance I was driving in Trinidad and I had to explain to the officer that we're not accustomed to multiple lane roads. So when I was perhaps driving too slow on the far side, I was there, but I didn't know because we don't have multiple roads. For the first time, Tobagonians would have been able to really drive and be kings on the island. Because here we would have had this two-lane road up, two-lane road down, all the way down to our beautiful new brand airport. But what did this administration do? They derailed that, and they decided that they wanted to spend your money that could have benefited you in other ways. And the reason why they wanted to spend your money is so that they can be in control of the tender. And because they are in control of the tender, they can in fact decide who they want to give. And we saw the effects of that. They gave it to their favorite contractor, California Stucco, the same contractor that received a contract in record-breaking time. 3 days. Madam Presiding Officer, a bid came in day 1. Day 2, the bid was evaluated, and day 3, a letter of award was given. World record. If that isn't corruption, Madam Presiding Officer, I don't know what is. Madam Presiding Officer, it gets worse. It gets worse, Madam Presiding Officer, but I will keep that information for later in my presentation. There are some questions the people of Tobago have been asking me, and that are better directed to the Secretary of Infrastructure. In earnest and for the sake of full disclosure, I will share some of these questions. After all of the delays, what is the new estimated cost of construction for that Friendship Connector Road? What are the terms of payment to the contractor responsible for the construction of the Friendship Connector Road? What is the interest rate the people of Tobago are being charged by the contractor of the Friendship Connector Road? Finally, and I want, if the Secretary refuses to answer as he always does, I think, Chief Secretary, you owe it to the people of Tobago, because that road belongs to the people of Tobago, to give a full disclosure on the status of the road, the cost of the road, the cost of the delays, the cost of the legal fees. And finally, what is the total cost to the people of Tobago? What is the total cost the people of Tobago are expected to pay for the Friendship Connector Road, which I repeat, was going to be paid, was going to be built for the people of Tobago by the central government of Trinidad and Tobago in collaboration with the Tobago House of Assembly. The central government was not going to build it alone. Yet you abandoned that plan where you could have had a collaborative arrangement with the central government, not utilizing your funding, and you decided to take the funding that you saying you don't have to go and spend it on a road, choosing a contractor that absolutely does not have the competence to complete the works in the way it should be done. Shoddy work, shoddy, and we are seeing the effects of it. The road breaking away already, not one truck drive on the road, and it falling apart. And we in Tobago must accept this. We can't wait to vote all out. Madam Presiding Officer, I recognize that the Chief Secretary has a new catchword when it comes to infrastructure development on the island. Before, everything was an emergency. Now, everything is a priority. I wonder if he really is aware of its meaning, priority. Madam Presiding Officer, The designs, consultations, and approvals for the realignment of Turpin Bend have been sitting in the division since 2021, collecting dust. And all of a sudden, election coming up, I am the representative for Charlottesville, and I now remember that that road is a priority. So you neglect the people for 3 years, but election coming up, the plans were there, just shovel ready, waiting. You neglect that. You went down to Friendship, find money for Friendship, couldn't find money for Turpin Bend, but election coming up, and all of a sudden we are being told that that road at that Turpin Bend is now a priority. And we have no issue because it was a project in train. But all we are alerting Tobagonians are how as to the disingenuity of this administration, that you're trying to hoodwink the people. Because if it was a priority in 2021 and you neglected it, how come now is a priority in 2024? How come? Well, at least the surveys and designs for King Peter's Bay Road were put to some good use, and we come. Because the plan was there, and all you all did is build it. You all have your time. I wonder if the community center and pavilion in Charlottesville that have remained incomplete are not a priority. I wonder. How about the Blue Food Village? The Blue Food Village. Madam Presiding Officer, there is some action to come on that Blue Food Village, but it will not be for this house. It will be for a place that involves police and thief. Madam Presiding Officer, that had a turning ceremony and platforms built with no consultation with the residents. Is that a priority, Madam Presiding Officer? How about the fishing facility?
Point of order, Madam Presiding Officer. Based on the standing orders, no member is allowed to tell untruths in the House. The information must be accurate. There were consultations about the Blue Food Village, about part of the fishing facility, and I was very much present for those consultations. The member said that there were no consultations on those projects. That is untruth, and the member must withdraw that from the records of this House. It is not truthful.
So
Verify your information, stop lying.
You does lie.
Members, I would not allow this to happen.
But why?
I won't allow it to happen. I won't allow it to happen, Chief Secretary, Minority Leader. This is not the place.
I listened attentively.
Honorable Chief Secretary, you would have your time to respond to this debate. Minority Leader, please continue.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. Madam Presiding Officer, I like fairness and balance. I listened in silence. I listened all kind of information. I did not disrupt. Madam Presiding Officer, they say the truth hurts, you know. The truth really hurts. And I could understand when you hear truth, how some people could get offended. Madam Presiding Officer, I wonder if it is his failing memory, or whether his tongue got pipped, or if it's just shame why he just disrupted me. He shame, Madam Presiding Officer, but the Chief Secretary rambled on for hours, and there was no mention of the Scarborough Development Plan, a plan that we, the people of Tobago, spent over $7 million on. And if we are to be fair to Tobagonians, yes, this zip line was one of the major issues that the people of Tobago voted against, and that was only $3 million. Just imagine we have spent $7 million on a plan to which there is not even one word, not a line. It just disappeared. Madam Presiding Officer, all of a sudden, this is not a priority. Madam Presiding Officer, there was no mention of turning Scarborough into a city, no grand expansion into the sea, even after spending $2.2 million on a stage that is washing away in the sea. which has now become Lover's Lane. Don't know if we're trying to increase the birth rate in Tobago, but that is the one. I have seen no useful purpose. $2.2 million. How has that benefited the schools that is crying out that they don't have paper? $2.2 million. How is that benefiting the mother who is going to Division of Health and asking for a food card to buy some grocery for her hungry child? $2.2 million, Madam Presiding Officer. Put that together, 2.2 and 7, that is almost $10 million wasted. Wasted. $10 million. And you spend a quarter. One trip, $250,000. Wasting Tobago money. And these are the people coming and tell me they don't have money, eh? These are the same people who come in and tell you they can't pay a gratuity because they don't have money. Hundreds of contract workers waiting on gratuity, but yet they're flying. They're high in the sky. But they say happy birds who fly high must come down to die. Madam Presiding Officer, is this same Chief Secretary who had a former P&M Secretary name all over the place? I think the matter must be still in court, I don't know. But he was ready to hang. We remember that. He dragged she all over with a zip line, with a rope, if you see him tugging and pulling hens to fro, hither to thither and whither. Destroy the young Tobagonian. But now, 7 million. And on top of that 7 million, you know they rented a building in Trinidad where absolutely no Tobagonian has ever stepped their foot for over $2.5 million. 2.5, no. Well, don't try to relinquish all the responsibilities as an executive council that took that decision. 2.5, headed by the member for Pallitive. $2.5 million you all approved, and not one Tobagonian was able to benefit. All they deserve to be in jail. Madam Presiding Officer, it's the same terrible secretary that spent $3 million to build a river in Crown Point. Every time it rains, it floods. Every time. Because he's my good friend, I'll leave him. But every time it floods, and I'm happy they move him out because he's a good man. I don't want your name tied up with that. But every time it floods, it rains. It's a nice river, but it's not Seas River. It's a nice river. Madam Presiding Officer, $3 million to make a bad matter worse. And I chuckle, but this is no laughing matter, Madam Presiding Officer, because this is scarce resources we're talking about. This is resources that every Secretary of Finance will tell you they have to go and make strong case to get for the people at Tobago. And when you see it being so callously spirited away, it is vexing, Madam Presiding Officer. Madam Presiding Officer, I'm a fair man, and maybe the Secretary felt some remorse after passing his connector road through the land of friendship that was earmarked and had it start turning for a water park. Maybe the Secretary felt so bad that he decided to start construction of the water park in Crown Point without consultation or EMA clearance, of course. Madam Presiding Officer, the last P&M administration made deliberate and steadfast strides in coastal management on the island. This was out of the recognition by a former P&M Chief Secretary that though we boast of it, Tobago may no longer be 116 square miles of island paradise due to climate change. The effects of climate change and coastal erosion have taken a serious toll on our island home. Hence the birth of the Coastal Zone Management Unit under the former DIQE. Madam Presiding Officer, through this unit under the guidance of the former Secretary, partnerships with multinational agencies such as CAF, IDB and CDB were formed. International experts were brought on the island to advise on the best way forward in regards to our coastal zone. Smith Warner, one of the leading coastal consultants in the Caribbean, was brought in to work on a restoration plan for Pigeon Point. The Magdalena Sea Defense System was commenced and 90% completed. The IDB agreed to assist with the development of a blue economy plan for Tobago. There was already an agreement on the CAF loan facility, and the technical consultants already agreed to assist in the construction of the coastal project at Grange Bay. Designs were completed for work to be done at Petitrew area, which is under serious threat. Data was being collected, comprehensive plans being formulated, and then the plug was pulled. The Coastal Zone Management Unit was uprooted. Thankfully, Madam Presiding Officer, they were allowed to complete the work at Magdalena, which I noticed this administration shamelessly taking credit for now. I'm also thankful that they did not fire Smith Warner like everyone else and allowed them to complete the critical work that began at the end of 2020. Madam Presiding Officer, imagine my surprise when I heard the Chief Secretary, out of the blue, making an announcement at an IDB function that environmental and coastal zone management will now fall under his office. The Coastal Zone Management Unit was placed under the Division of Infrastructure to avoid the duplication of resources. Though the technical officers in the unit are highly qualified, they rely heavily on the support of other technical resources at the disposal of the Division of Infrastructure. This VAPS move by the Chief Secretary is sure to cost the Assembly millions of unnecessary dollars for additional technical and mechanical resources. Madam Presiding Officer, even as I speak of the Coastal Zone Management Unit, I am reminded of the armored rock used in many of their interventions, which comes from the quarry at Studley Park. Madam Presiding Officer, oh, what a tangled web we weave when at first we seek to deceive. For months, Madam Presiding Officer, I stood here in this August House on behalf of the people of Tobago, seeking questions in the operations of Studley Park Enterprise Limited. For months, Madam Presiding Officer, the Secretary danced and played and laughed because he thought that he could hide behind technicalities and vagaries. But Madam Presiding Officer, old people rarely said, what in the darkness must come to light. So Tobagonians had to find out about the pumpkin expert, who is now executive chairman. Tobagonians also had to find out the hard way it seems that managing a hard rock quarry and selling pumpkins are not the same. Because, Madam Presiding Officers, the truckers had to go back in time, sleeping in their trucks overnight to get aggregate. Total mismanagement at the quarry. Imagine, Madam Presiding Officer, the executive chairman had the unmitigated gall to try to tell Tobagonians that the problem is not one of mismanagement. It is not the constant breakdowns, nor their lack of maintenance plan. However, nor their lack of procurement plan, but rather the high demand they are experiencing. Madam Presiding Officer, if I was in another place, I would say exactly where that story should go and which animal it may be closely related to. Madam Presiding Officer, as I wrap up on infrastructure, I wish to advise Tobagonians to brace for the worst case of election paving we would ever witness. Worse, this incompetent administration has paved a grand total of 3.5 roads since coming into office. And just imagine they told us they were allocating $300 million for 4. But they have only paved only 3.5 roads. And out of that 3.5 road they have paved over Boko. After 1 year, that road is in a state of disrepair. The people in Pigeon Point, yes, member for Crown Point, I'm sure you get the calls. The people in Pigeon Point that you all went and interviewed and made a video with are still waiting and wondering when you are returning to finish the other half of the road. Madam Presiding Officer, I now turn to health. We are here for some time. I will now turn briefly to the issue of health, Madam Presiding Officer. There are indications that there are plans to improve secondary care services on the island. In the last fiscal period, 2023-2024, you plan to procure 10 new ambulances at a cost of $12 million. How many did you procure? I hope the deputy will answer that question, because we got a different answer when we asked that question in the House. In this fiscal period, 2024-2025, you are saying to us that you will embark on the procurement of 4 new ambulances and phase the change out of the old ambulance fleet at a budgeted expenditure of $6 million. We would like to know how many you procure in 2023 and how many more can we expect? Because we were told in 2023 that you were going to allocate $12 million to purchase ambulances. What we got instead is the rental of ambulances from outside of Tobago, paying almost $1 million for the 3 months. So imagine if you are allocated $12 million to buy ambulances, you end up spending half of that, because the year almost we are in the middle of the year. So it means you will have already spent $2 million on renting ambulances, when that $2 million could have been spent to purchase. So we want to know what is happening. What is the status with respect to the procurement of TRHA-owned ambulances for the use of the people of Tobago? Madam Presiding Officer, they assert a full operationalization of the Scarborough Hospital in fiscal 2025 to give effect to the following: opening of inpatient services and 24/7 accident and emergency operations from 2024 November. Madam Presiding Officer, the Roxborough Hospital has been constructed and completed, and I want to go very slowly. It is important to note that the Roxborough Hospital has been constructed and completed since 2020, with emergency room, diagnostic support, and inpatient services. All that was handed over in 2020. There ought to be no difficulty in commissioning that facility as a 24-hour service. Please note that ER services are 24/7, as one can tell when an emergency, as no one can tell when an emergency would occur. Madam Presiding Officer, and I cry shame on the member for Palliative as the leader of this administration, heading an administration that was overwhelmingly supported by people from the East, that even now the mothers cannot enjoy that feeling of birthing their child in the place to which they have grown. Many still have to come down to Scarborough. In fact, I still get the horror stories of persons having to hustle, speed through. Sometimes when you see a car flying through in the night, don't be vexed with them, because it might just be a mother from the East trying to get to the Scarborough General Hospital just to ensure that she don't birth her baby in a car. And this is at the hands of a leader who the people from the East supported. No excuse. If you could have turned hills and valley to bring that friendship corrupted road to Tobago, you should have turned hills and valley to ensure the people of Roxborough, the people of Far East, enjoy a 24/7 hospital. And just to make matters worse, we had the recent incident where a mother of the deceased is claiming that had that hospital been open 24/7, just perhaps, because we are in God, we don't know what would happen, but just perhaps the chances of that mother and that baby surviving would have been higher. because at least they would have been able to get the medical intervention at a time when the intervention would have actually mattered. And that is on the hands of the member for Palituve, Lansome Speyside, and the member for Belgarden, whatever else, Argyle. And both of them have their hands. Because ironically, both of them are people from the East. Imagine I'm from Wim and I feel the pain. And how much more should you, the people who live in the East, know the pains, know the challenges? And you telling me after 3 years, you have a hospital and you come in to give some lousy excuse about PNM and PNM and PNM when you said you will fix this? Well, that's a shame. Madam Presiding Officer, with respect to the hospital management information system, this is nothing new. So to the concept of unique identifier. They said, to continue the implementation of the hospital management information system, you estimated a budget of $4.5 million. At what stage are we in this process? Tell us. Diagnostic, Madam Presiding Officer, they spoke to diagnostic. A proposal was highlighted to institute a series of measures to engender shorter waiting times for diagnostic services in 2024. Madam Presiding Officer, again, in 2023, they told us that their administration will procure, in respect of medical imaging, the following: MRI machine at the cost of $10 million, and one CT scanner at the cost of $7 million. In fiscal 2024, you said the medical equipment to be procured includes one 64-slice CT scanner, as well as a portable X-ray machine. So then, Madam Presiding Officer, what is the status of the 2023 procurement of these same urgently needed equipment? Why are they back in the budget? Is it that they are procuring more? Did they buy those, or is it that they buy them and they mash up? Tell us. Tell us. We want to know how our monies are being spent. Because if you recognize, after 3.5 hours listening to the Chief Secretary, none of us are the wiser as to how our money, because the money belongs to each and every one of us, how it was actually spent. There was no report on that. What we got is a report on how we want to spend more. That is what he kept us here hostage for 3.5 hours, to hear how we're going to spend more. So I'm going to keep you here for the equal 3.5 hours to hear how we'll spend with money. Madam Presiding Officer, it must be noted, laboratory, that for the laboratory, there's a backlog of samples to be processed. In 2024, 2025, you propose to address this alarming situation. How then are patients being treated when they are waiting their results for these urgent tests? Tell us. The population needs to know. Madam Presiding Officer, another initiative as proposed in last Monday's budget presentation was initiating a process to address a backlog of about 1,500 samples and images at an estimated cost of $3 million. We expect that the work processes will be reviewed such that the efficiency of the diagnostic services will improve and patients can be treated in a timely manner. You are saying as well that the TRHA will acquire new equipment for the laboratory section. What equipment for the laboratory? The laboratory benefited from equipment upgrade within the past 4 years, just before your administration came to office. What has happened to that? Surgical department. Your administration plans to upgrade the opening theater at the Scarborough General Hospital by providing a colonoscope, an endoscope, and cystoscopy set to allow for the diagnosis and management of gastrointestinal diseases. We sincerely hope that these materialize because the average Tobagonian has serious concerns about healthcare on the island. Madam Presiding Officer, at Roxborough Hospital, the proposal is to procure laparoscopic tower to allow for laparoscopic surgeries at the Roxborough Health Facility. Madam Presiding Officer, you are not ready to provide a 24-hour service, but you're here talking about a laparoscopic surgeries. So you're not ready, you don't have the capacity to implement 24 service, but you want to provide fancy surgery. So you see how the priorities misalign? How are you doing it? You're saying to Tobagoans, I cannot provide basic medical care for you for 24 hours, but I want to give you fancy surgery. So how are you doing it? Tell us. Tell us where your priorities are. Madam Presiding Officer, the upgrade urology services for the Scarborough General and Roxborough hospitals were also mentioned. This is much needed as the past administration pursued men's health as a priority in the Tobago population. We await the full use of the Blue Room to support other men's health initiatives. Hospital operations. Moreover, Madam Presiding Officer, you propose to deploy a computerized equipment and facility maintenance management system. Shouldn't this be part of the hospital management information system? Let us know. Recruitment of specialists. You stated that specialists will be recruited on a full-time and part-time basis and experts will be outsourced. In what specialties, Madam Presiding Officer? The fact is that most specialties exist at the hospital already. It may be necessary for disciplines like ENT and vascular surgery, for example. In addition, there may be trauma cases requiring orthopedic intervention. This may be required on a part-time basis. But what is the rationale for the full-time? Tell us. Madam Presiding Officer, inpatient care, neonatology. In 2023, you said you plan to expand the neonatal care unit at a cost of $1.8 million to increase capacity for newborns, Madam Presiding Officer. In 2024, you are saying that there will be an upgrade and rebranding of the neonatal care program at a cost of $2 million. So was that expansion that you talked about in 2023 done? I hope the Secretary will report. We need to know because it has come back and we have now seen the cost balloon from 1.8 million to 2 million. Madam Presiding Officer, we need to know what you completed in 2023 because what we have seen so far for the healthcare sector is that mostly everything that you said you would do in 2023 has returned in 2024. So clearly, if I was to deduce from that, is that you really did not do anything. And we need to know. Madam Presiding Officer, is it that the NICU is expanded to accommodate additional neonates? Have you procured these equipment in 2023? You said you were expanding in 2023 to increase capacity. How many more cuts, etc., can be accommodated? Are we moving from being able to accommodate 4 neonates to about 6? What is it? We would simply like to know. Infrastructure upgrade. As it relates to infrastructure upgrade, Madam Presiding Officer, it was mentioned that upgrades will be made to the buildings and grounds of various health centers at a cost of $1.6 million. Which primary care centers benefited from upgrades in 2023-2024? Which is to be done in this fiscal? Shouldn't the repairs and maintenance of the buildings be on an ongoing program? We need to know what has been done at Plymouth and Scarborough Health Centers in the last fiscal year. Madam Presiding Officer, in the area of primary care services, you intend to establish the Diabetic Wellness Center at a proposed cost of $3 million. A stroke and diabetes clinic exists. Health promotion and disease prevention is available in all the primary care centers. This is part of primary prevention for decades. So what is new? Rather, Madam Presiding Officer, what we should be speaking about, perhaps, is strengthening, not re-establishing, because you can't re-establish what exists. What you can do is strengthen, add value to what already exists. Madam Presiding Officer, So all that is proposed under public health is implementing a Scarborough waste management and disposal program. The Scarborough waste management and disposal program will be implemented in fiscal 2025 at a cost of approximately $3 million. Madam Presiding Officer, waste management and disposal is the remit of the Public Health Department. Please, what is this program that is to be implemented? Tell us. Is it going to be different from what is already under the remit of public health? Social protection. Madam Presiding Officer, the administration intends to make the grant application process less tedious in order to enable faster dissemination of grants to successful applicants. You need to map the process and see where there are kinks and improve them. Because, Madam Presiding Officer, one of the very first motions I recall that came to this House was a motion about how they would have this integrated system, basically this one-stop shop, where persons can just simply come, and whether you need social assistance at settlements, whether you need social assistance, wherever it exists, you will be able to get it right there. What is the status of that program? Where are we with that? Madam Presiding Officer, as it relates to the feasibility of increasing the thresholds of the REACH grant by 100% from 7,500 to 15,000. Madam Presiding Officer, yes, welcome any opportunity to place more resources in the hands of Tobagonians is welcome. But Madam Presiding Officer, I was once the chairman of the REACH program, so I understand the challenges there. And the challenge, one of the main challenges with the REACH program is funding. So if you are already having challenges with funding under REACH, where you are taking sometimes 3 months, even sometimes up to a year, to approve a grant and to be able for the person to get a purchase order, what would be different to guarantee these applicants that not only will they be benefiting from more, but they will be benefiting from it at a faster period of time? What? Tell us what systems you have changed. What will be new? Because it doesn't make no sense that you are saying, I'm going to give you more, but you have to wait longer. So give us that assurance that you have worked the process, you have mapped the process, and it will mean that these people who depend on the process can get the kind of service that they expect. Madam Presiding Officer, another strategy in fiscal 2025 is to create new social assistance grant offering, such as the Kinship Support Program, which will provide financial support to relatives taking care of children in instances where their parents are either unable to or are absent. Madam Presiding Officer, I know too well that this is in fact needed, because oftentimes I have parents or even aunts and uncles coming to my district office seeking social assistance for a child to which they may not be able to get the support from the social welfare unit. And therefore, anything that would address such a situation is welcome. But the question we have to ask, Madam Presiding Officer, is how are we going to create the process, or how far are we with the process? How are we going to ensure that we can identify what is real, what is genuine, what is actually bona fide from what is not? How are we going to deal with it? How are we going to ensure that those who require the support gets the support, and again, gets it in real time? Because that is the challenge with social assistance. It's not that if you would get it, but it's when you're going to get it. And sometimes people need help right now. And I've heard absolutely nothing as to how you're going to help people in the situation that they are in right now. Sometimes people need a hand out of the fire, else they would burn, they would crash. How are we going to ensure that we provide systems that can truly meet the urgent need? Because you're giving everything else priority. You have priority to give your contractors money. But do you have as a priority the resources to ensure that Tobagonians who require support, whether it's at settlements, whether it's at health and social services, whether it's at finance for grant funding for their businesses, can get it now? That is what we want to hear. Madam Presiding Officer, the administration has taken the policy decision to establish a diversity and inclusion unit within the Department of Social Protection to develop practical solutions to reduce the inequities faced by historically marginalized segments of the population, such as the elderly and persons with disabilities. This is a selected priority aimed at improving the socio-economic well-being of this segment of the population. Madam Presiding Officer, well-meaning again, but as a student of sociology, I understand that not only are elderly and disability persons who are marginalized, you have single fathers. Oftentimes, single fathers are one of the most marginalized people in society because everybody expects that men, regardless of their situation, will be able to carry their burden. And therefore, while you may have support systems specifically engineered to support women, the question is, how many systems do we really have that are so focused on supporting men? And I didn't see men. Men are sometimes the most forgotten sphere of society. We spoke to one person who gives such support, and they were telling us men are crying out for a space to just be able to get together and socialize and talk about their problems. How are we going to address these issues? Is the diversity and inclusion unit going to treat with this? Because if we do not ensure that we develop our men folk, these men are someday going to become, or young boys or young men will become fathers. And if they are not socialized to take responsibility and deal with issues, that is what leads to gender-based violence. That is what leads to all the single mothers. So we have to take care of our men. Is this unit going to treat with that? Madam Presiding Officer, I turn to agriculture. Madam Presiding Officer, agriculture is a crucial sector for our island, essential for food security, economic development, and sustainable livelihoods. However, the track record of the current administration raises legitimate concerns about the feasibility and sincerity of their new promises. Madam Presiding Officer, in the first instance, they must acknowledge the pattern of their unfulfilled promises over the past 2.5 years. Numerous commitments were made regarding agricultural development, yet tangible results have been sparse. For example, promises of increased funding, improved infrastructure, and enhanced support for farmers have largely remained on paper, with little to no implementation. I will now further highlight some of their failed promises, Madam Presiding Officer. There was a promise of increased funding and grants for farmers. Did that happen? Madam Presiding Officers, the reality is many farmers reported to us in our consultations that they did not receive any financial support whatsoever. And we saw the continuous fight between TATCO and farmers. So here it is, an institution that was designed to facilitate farmers, then turn around and was bullying farmers, farmers being kicked out of TATCO, farmers bringing food for the consumption of Tobagonians, were being run off the compound calling police. Imagine that. That is what was happening. So when you're supposed to be an enabler, you in fact turn around and be a destabler. You were destabilizing the food security of Tobago. Madam Presiding Officer, those who lamented that it was insufficient for, and those who got the funding that I mentioned, said that in most respects it was insufficient for any meaningful development activity. Madam Presiding Officer, one of my most disappointing observations during this announcement, this budget presentation with respect to agriculture, is when I heard about this concept of doing this mill and this hatchery. Madam Presiding Officer, what is the plan by this administration? Is it that the THA is going to invest the money and the THA going to manage? And the reason I'm asking this is because I know many young Tobagonians currently engaged in the feasibility, currently engaged in even looking for the financing to undertake similar initiative. So then why would the THA want to compete with the private sector in an area where there is already no real? Why would you want to? You should be encouraging that. What you should be doing is using venture capital as the leverage to assist those persons so interested, and perhaps there might be three with the same idea, or one might want a hatchery, one might want a mill, but they are complementary kind of activities, and it's to coordinate that kind of interest, put it together, support it, facilitate it, and ensure it comes to Tobago, not you going and take Tobago people money to go and run it, and we know it will crash, like everything else you all have managed, like jazz, like everything else. Why? You ought to be the enabler, not the one overtaking public over private enterprise, especially in an economy where the private sector is already small. We're supposed to give the private sector room to grow, not crowd them. And that is what TATCO is doing at this time. TATCO is competing with the farmers. TATCO is supposed to be buying all the products from the farmers and adding value. That was the vision for TATCO. Not to go and take the flour and then competing with the same people who are producing the flour. Madam Presiding Officer, I want to turn, and as I said, flour, the following projects: the flour factory, the establishment of food hubs, the introduction of mega farms and TARI, have been repeated with monotonous regularity in the last 3 budget presentations. Nothing has happened. What is wrong? What is different this time around? I saw them rushing to launch mega farm. So you launch mega farm without a mega farm. Where is the mega farm? Just like how you rush and put up sign wrong Bacolet for Scarborough Second, up to now we can't even see a design. You see how they back to front? No, you have to design the thing, conceptualize the thing, put up the thing, and then Tobagonians can envision the thing and tell you whether they like it or not. And you want to tell me about consultation? How could you consult without a design? How could you consult without the people actually having an idea as to what you're going and build? Consultation doesn't simply mean going in a room and talk to people. Consultation means giving people an active voice to contribute, to participate. That is consultation. So don't tell me you went by no school and you talk to people and that is consultation. In my book, you did not consult. So you could come with all kind of excuse. Did not lie, you did not consult because you did not give them an opportunity to see where you was building. In fact, all we have is some horseshoe on the ground up here at Bloody Bay. Nobody knows what is going there. Not an idea. $4 million done spent. And all we have is a horse or is some little pad box on the ground. Concrete box. And we must accept that? Boy. Madam Presiding Officer, given the infrastructural challenges faced by the division outlined above, how practical is the implementation of the advanced technology dry food systems that they are proposing? What are their plans to adequately train farmers in using these new technologies, bearing in mind that we have an aging population in the agricultural sector? Madam Presiding Officer, in 2022, TATCO signed an MOU with Novo Farms Limited to supply alternative flour, and the Shore Park packing house was earmarked for processing. However, despite representatives visiting in July of said year, there has been a noticeable delay in finalizing the alternative flour factory. This delay hinders our ability to diversify agricultural products and support local farmers effectively. Similarly, the establishment of mango and guava farms in Kendall and Louisdor was a promising initiative. Yet, we have seen little progress in developing these farms, leaving our local agro-processors with their hands in the air. Consultations for implementing user fees for protected sites like Little Tobago and the Main Ridge Forest Reserve have continued. Tangible outcomes remain elusive. Madam Presiding Officer, this lack of timely action impacts our ability to manage and conserve in a sustainable manner these vital natural resources. The vet laboratory project and the Botanic Gardens project were ambitious undertakings slated for 2023. However, the construction of the veterinary laboratory and the phased upgrades of the Botanic Gardens have not progressed as planned, leaving our agricultural and environmental sectors without the critical support they need. Madam Presiding Officer, in 2023, the focus shifted towards building safe, sustainable and resilient supply systems and modernizing agricultural practices. Despite these goals, the development of 2 mega farms intended to boost food sovereignty and reduce food inflation has faced significant delays, and perhaps the Secretary should report to us as to why. While the division aimed to transform Tari and the Kendall Farm School into centers of agricultural research, the progress has been stagnant. Training programs for Tobago youth in agriculture are essential, but the minimum target of 200 young persons are in fact insufficient. And Madam Presiding Officer, again, I want to address the dishonesty of this administration. They spoke about the Shade House program, and not one mention was made about the fact that that Shade House program is a collaboration between the government of Trinidad and Tobago and the Tobago House of Assembly, and it is a collaboration because the Prime Minister, a Tobago-born Prime Minister, was insistent that Tobago not be left out from that opportunity to breed the next generations of farmers throughout Trinidad and Tobago. And therefore, it is nothing wrong with telling Tobago people we collaborated, because it is through collaboration, meaningful collaboration, you are able to advance your position, especially when you are saying that you have limited support. So if you have limited funding and you have a brother or a sister or a friend who may have some more and who may be able to help you, why not work with them? Simple. You can then decide, even if you believe some of their philosophies are different from you, and you may have to, at some point, draw swords. That day will come. But until that time, our focus should be utilizing the resources, the God-given resources of both Trinidad and Tobago, to build both Tobago and Trinidad. That is what it's supposed to be about. Not us against them and them against us. That fight is petty. We don't need it. We can achieve much more working together. Madam Presiding Officer. Madam Presiding Officer, I turn to community development. Madam Presiding Officer, the plans by the administration for the Division of Community Development and Sport, while the vision behind these initiatives is commendable, it is imperative to critically analyze the execution, highlighting the repetition and unmet promises that have characterized these plans. But Madam Presiding Officer, as I said, I like to be fair, and therefore there's a new secretary, a young man with some energy, and therefore I will not hold him accountable for the failures that went before his time. I like to give everybody the fair chance. The secretary took me on some visits across my community. We identified about 4 or 5 projects, and I hope that the secretary would not be like the Secretary of Infrastructure that had me waste an entire day looking at about 50 projects in the community of Darrell Springwim. And all we got, and because one was an emergency where the road absolutely collapsed, all we got is about 2 projects. So I hold to the Secretary of Community Development, a young man I admire, that you will in fact do right by the people of Tobago and not just do right for party business. So what I'm about to contribute is points that may help in strengthening the work that you have to do. And feel free to call me anytime if you need any kind of advice, any kind of support. Where you come from? Madam Presiding Officer, in 2022, the Tobago Faith-Based Council outlined several areas of assistance to be meted out to these religious organizations, including health and wellness, building design, technical advice, vocational training, and financial grants. While financial grants and donations have been distributed, the promised support in health and wellness, technical advice, and vocational training is still awaited by many faith-based organizations in the various communities. And we know some need more help than others, so we hope that there will be a system to ensure that it's all-inclusive and that all faith-based organizations can get added support, not just simply to give them grant to put on a wing on a church, but to ensure that the faith-based organizations are able to properly participate in our communities, because right now we have the crime challenge, and we must ensure that all our various organizations play their part, whether it be faith-based, community organizations, sporting organizations. We got to ensure that we provide them with the support so they too can play their role in the community. Another example of poor execution by this administration is the languishing integrated facility in Charlottesville. And as again, I am sure this time the people of Charlottesville will get that facility because we have a young man who will, I believe, will give it that attention. Madam Presiding Officer, there being designs and estimates for community facilities in Roxborough. I would hope that that Roxborough facility would be addressed. In the area of sport, Madam Presiding Officer, the promised technical and financial support, modernization of facilities and training of coaches have been slow to materialize. We also want to find out what is the status of the construction of the Bacolot indoor facility that has stalled. We also have this beautiful facility in Wim, one of those areas previously known as, well, will be labeled as a hotspot. That facility was really engendered to ensure that we actively engage the young men, especially in the area, through technical vocational learning. And now we have an opportunity to do some adjustment with that facility because WIM currently is producing cricketers for the West Indies and the world. We have the two James brothers, two of the brightest talents in Trinidad and Tobago when it comes to cricket. And therefore, we are proposing as the people of WIM that we want to have on that facility, resident there, the first state-of-the-art indoor nets, so that those nets would then become a place where all of Tobago, all cricketers, because we live in, we have a dry and a rainy season. And therefore, when it rains, most persons who are engaged in the sport of cricket cannot train. But if we are able to make the investment in that facility at that spot, that can be one of many to come. And therefore, I hope and I will continue to engage the Secretary of Community Development, Youth Development and Sport to ensure that those pleas of the people of WIM come to fruition so that we can continue to produce more Joshuas and Orlando and the other James and the other brilliant cricketers we have in Tobago. And as we talk about cricket, there was mention previously about this cricket facility to be somewhere down, I believe it was Friendship or so, I understand that there were discussions there. And I would hope that the Secretary will tell us whether that is still a project that this current administration is facilitating. I say facilitating because I understand it is the Tobago Cricket Association who came to the Tobago House of Assembly with the vision. And if you have lands to give your friends to build house to put on the open market, you should have lands to give our sporting bodies so that they can bring activities that can even boost our sport tourism activities and endeavors. Madam Presiding Officer, looking ahead to 2024, the administration proposes the implementation of integrated Spark, Step Up, Take Charge, Innovate, Restore, Monitor, and Elevate, and if you take the acronym STIRME, Program to Create Safer Communities. While any initiative which may result in safer communities is to be welcome, the absence of detailed information to facilitate an evaluative criticism leaves this as another pie-in-the-sky project. It is therefore crucial that this project does not meet the fate of previously unimplemented plans. The budgeted cost of $38 million prima facie is suspect. I would really hope that we'll get some more details as to what exactly this $38 million involves. And is this $38 million also part of the electoral district fund? Because I didn't really hear much of that fund after we had 5 secretaries leave this island for 10 days to go and learn about the fund. So by now I thought the fund would have been up and running. Heard absolutely nothing about it. I heard one member has now vacated to go and manage the fund, but I would like to hear some more on what is the exact status of that electoral district fund. Madam Presiding Officer, the proposed capacity building programs to assist community, youth and sporting organizations in managing crime and violence must be more than a repeated promise. Again, we have the Lalon Gordon Fund, and I could share with you the challenge of, as I said, our resident, Mr. Joshua James, where this is a professional cricketer, cricket is seasonal, and when he's off season, there's little to nothing for him to do. How do we ensure that we provide the funding so that he can continue to remain in continuous training? We don't want him working by any supermarket. We want him to be focused on honing his skills. So how are we going to allocate funding to hone in his skills? All right, people has make a mistake. We all being petty as usual. You all giggle, cry. Yeah, man. Yeah, all giggle, man. Giggle.
But continue.
Laugh and cry resides at the same place. But Madam Presiding Officer, as I was saying, so if we can have the Lalon Gordon Fund properly resourced to provide adequate support for elite athletes, not just in cricket, not just in football, not just in track and field, but all promising elite athletes, and all you have to do is create the thresholds. If you are able to be making West Indies, perhaps you get this. If you're making Carifta, you get this. And let us give the athletes some real support, not token support. Madam Presiding Officer, and as I wrap up community development, I notice at the level of central government, you're feeling a buzz. If we are to be honest, there is a buzz when it comes to youth empowerment at the level of central government. Almost every week, wherever you turn, you are seeing a new program, whether it is for mechanical, anything you can think about. If you want to fly plane, it have a program. If you want to learn to be a plumber, there's a program. And all I'm saying to the new Secretary of Community Development, there might be an opportunity for you to also collaborate. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Perhaps they may even share their resources with you. So you don't even have to find new funding. Have the conversation and see how you can bring some of those programs to Tobago. And if you bring it, you could take credit for it, just cite the source. That is all you have to do. Like if you're doing any project, cite the source. So say, this was supported by the ministry. But you can take credit for bringing it if you so choose. But let's collaborate. Let's have these things for the benefit of Tobago, and too many young people are idle. Too many young people are on the block, and we need to engage our young people. Madam Presiding Officer, I now turn to the issue of failed governance and lack of transparency. Madam Presiding Officer, there's a lot of work that has been done in this area. As minority leader, I have come into this house, as you would know. We have asked over 120 questions. A lot of them still remains unanswered. Even beyond that, we have filed over 25 Freedom of Information questions. Most of them have not been answered. The most culpable of those state agencies is the Division of Infrastructure that even refuses to respond to pre-action protocol letter. And I'm saying here today, let it be known that I, as minority leader, if the resources won't be supported by the state, will find private and personal support to ensure that we prosecute those matters in the court, to ensure that the questions that are being asked are properly answered. Madam Presiding Officer, in this regard, the current administration of the Tobago House of Assembly came into office with grand promises of transparency and accountability. And I remember quite vividly the member for Belgarden, Glamorgan, saying to us when she was on the hustings as a PDP candidate, that they will create this website, where on this website you will see all the undertakings, all the various tenders. And after those tenders are uploaded, you will also see all who bid. And you would also see all what they bid, where they bid, how they bid, and then they will tell you who win. Madam Presiding Officer, I can tell you with all conviction, I looked high, I looked low, and no such website currently exists. So I invite the member to guide me as to perhaps where can I find this website that was promised since 2021. Madam Presiding Officer, I want to draw to the attention of this Honorable House. Please permit me to raise a troubling issue, Madam Presiding Officer, regarding the award of a franchise agreement between EID Cut and the Ascend Hotel Group. Madam Presiding Officer, recently I received a dossier of troubling information involving what appears to be the breakdown of corporate governance at EID Cut, the least of which raises the following concerns regarding the procurement of a hotel operator to manage the Manta Lodge. Madam Presiding Officer, the first area of concern, based on the evidence before me, which I would like to enlighten this House, has been sent to both the Office of the Procurement Regulator and the Integrity Commission, is that there was unilateral decision-making. And the question therefore exists: did the acting CEO of EID Cut sign the agreement without board approval? Did the CEO acting at EID Cut engage the citizens of Tobago in a franchise arrangement without the covering approval of the board of directors? Madam Presiding Officer, the other area of concern is whether there was a breach in procurement. Because, Madam Presiding Officer, the evidence before us is that while a tender went out, and the deadline of which was October 3rd, a contract was engaged in the same period, October. So was there an active procurement process that was bypassed?
Member, relevance?
We are talking about the use of public funds and procurement, which is important, integral to how you manage public resources.
I would also advise you that this is still the budget. So
yes, Madam President.
Please keep it in keeping with the budget presentation.
Yes. And this is EID Cut. EID Cut is receiving, Madam Presiding Officer, they are about to receive over $66 million of public funds, and therefore they must be scrutinized. Madam Presiding Officer, legal oversight, very important. Was legal guidance properly sought and retained? Number 4, regulatory compliance. Is the Ascend Group registered with the Office of the Procurement Regulator? Madam Presiding Officer, and the final, 5th, conflict of interest. Was there an apparent conflict of interest between the acting CEO's familial connections to the Ascend Group and her functioning as the acting CEO, acting unilaterally in this regard regarding this contract, where perhaps there is some private beneficial interest? The investigations will answer most of those questions, and I can tell Tobagonians, sit back, relax, and enjoy. Madam Presiding Officer, these concerns raise significant questions about corporate governance, transparency, and accountability. An immediate, comprehensive investigation is imperative to uphold the public trust and ensure proper conduct within the Tobago House of Assembly. Madam Presiding Officer, I turn to enhancing revenue generation and economic diversification. Madam Presiding Officer, the future prosperity of Tobago hinges on our ability to generate sustainable revenue and diversify our economy. It is imperative that we move beyond traditional sectors and embrace a multifaceted approach to economic development. This requires immediate and decisive action from the Tobago House of Assembly to attract foreign direct investments. To this end, Madam Presiding Officer, I urge the Assembly to take the following steps. Create a conducive business environment. Madam Presiding Officer, one of the most important aspects of creating conducive business environment is the whole business of trust and confidence. Madam Presiding Officer, I would like to draw to this House a newspaper article which indicated that in fact an investor current working in the Tobago space had a meeting confirmed with the Chief Secretary, flew all the way from New York only to be told that that meeting was cancelled. Madam Presiding Officer, I wish to remind the Chief Secretary and those on the other side that the business environment is very incestuous. People talk, they know each other. And when incidents like this happen, it breaches trust, it breaches confidence, and therefore perhaps this is why he has flown many trips and is unable to successfully identify any tangible returns. Because if people are not confident and do not trust your word and trust that you will hold your word, then nobody will invest in you. And therefore, I urge those on the other side to change their ways. Madam Presiding Officer, promote key sectors. Identify and promote sectors with high growth potential, such as tourism, agriculture, and technology, and we talk about AI and how that can really boost Tobago's production. By developing these areas, we can create new job opportunities and enhance our economic resilience. And the question, therefore, we talk about simply providing people with rent fee. It feels like we're giving away. But if you have an asset that is really worthy, that is valuable, you don't just hand over the asset. What you do is create the environment, create the incentives, and then ensure that you have systems available so that people would come. So what is the plan for Cove? Is it that we're just going to tell people come and take land? What is the plan? Enhance infrastructure. Invest in infrastructure development to support business activities. This includes improving transportation networks, enhancing digital connectivity, and upgrading public utilities. Market Tobago internationally. Launch targeted marketing campaigns to showcase Tobago's unique offerings. Not what we see now, misdirection, misalignment of the marketing strategy. In fact, if you ask the average Tobagonian, what are we marketing? Nobody seems to know. Because in order for us in Tobago to properly market what we have, we in Tobago must first understand and appreciate what we have so that we can sell it to, because if you to sell a product, if you don't understand the product, if you can't tell people the features of the product, how you can convince me to buy that product? So we have to go on an aggressive strategy, both at the level of Tobago, Trinidad, because the other aspect of tourism and in ensuring that we have a very vibrant tourism is that we must first convince Trinidadians that Tobago is the place to come. Because if, as all people say, charity begins at home and ends abroad. So if we want to bring people from abroad, we must first be able to attract, entice, and excite the people who are right next door to us, which is Trinidad. At this time, most Trinidadians are hopping planes and going elsewhere every weekend, especially the ones who have the money to spend. So how are we going to target these Trinidadians to come with their money, the ones who really have money, and stay at our hotels and our guest houses? How are we going to treat with this? Support local entrepreneurs. Foster an environment where local business can thrive. Provide training, access to financing, and mentorship programs to help entrepreneurs succeed. Madam Presiding Officer, and in this context, I would like to publicly and place on record my commendation of Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley and his government for their unwavering commitment to Tobago's development. The enhancement of public utilities through WASA and infrastructure initiatives spearheaded by NITCO are laying foundation for our future. The nearly completed $1 billion airport will be a pivotal driver for our tourism industry, significantly boosting our capacity to attract international visitors. Moreover, the Prime Minister's efforts in facilitating hotel developments, including the Marriott project, are commendable and crucial for expanding our tourism infrastructure. As we speak, the Prime Minister is in Tobago, along with, as far as I understand, the Secretary of Tourism, looking at potential sites for investors. Investors he went out and sought and is now bringing them. He didn't just say, let me leave them in Trinidad. He also brought them to Tobago so that Tobago can also benefit from that opportunity. Well, it's so disorderly.
Members, standing order 44, please be guided.
Thank you, Madam Presiding
Please
Officer,
continue.
from the protection of the lawless. However, it is disappointing to note, Madam Presiding Officer, that the three secretaries' recent budget presentation fails to address the critical issues of revenue generation. Instead, it primarily focuses on demand consumption via transfers from the central government. This approach is unsustainable in the long term and does not provide a robust framework for economic growth and stability. It is crucial that we shift our focus towards creating self-sustaining revenue streams and reducing what we would term government transfers. We must be able to create our own streams of revenue in addition to what we get from Trinidad. So what we get from Trinidad should be what we use to drive and build the Tobago economy, not just to sustain it, not just to pay workers, not just to overburden the recurrent expenditure, but to ensure that we can invest in development initiatives that can in fact then bring a return. And as you bring a return, you create a larger economy, and that is how you grow the economy. But when you have capital flight, like chasing away your Tobago-born and bred contractors, and they are now running elsewhere. It means they have taken away their investment potential out of the economy. So if they were putting in $200 million into the economy, they have gone. And what you have replaced that with are people who have absolutely no interest in building Tobago. So you have pumped $300 million and given it to people who don't have any interest in Tobago. So when they get paid, they go back with all Tobago money to their places of comfort, spend their money there, build their people there, and the Secretary of Infrastructure knows that best because he explained that to us. He explained that to us, Madam Presiding Officer. He said that when you invest, when you take what you have and you give it to people outside of Tobago, what you are in fact doing is building an economy elsewhere. So I simply want to ask, when you take $300 million of Tobago money and gift it to contractors elsewhere, who are you in fact building? Madam Presiding Officer, I just want to turn to share with the people of Tobago some of the highlights of what you can expect from a renewed, revitalized, rejuvenated People's National Administration come sometime December 2025 or even before. And as usual, the People's National Movement is a party about planning and preparing for governance. So we don't just come in like VAPs, because some of them still dreaming and it's only now they wake up. So I see some of them finally start back to go and give bread. They ain't give bread for 30 months, but all of a sudden their foot get back energy and they're ready to go and give bread. But the people waiting on all that. So Madam Presiding Officer, I will now give my colleagues on the other side and the people of Tobago a snapshot of well-crafted, realistic, and logical policies that can assist in harnessing Tobago's full potential. The orange economy. The significance of the orange economy has been recognized. The creative and cultural industries in contributing to Tobago's economic growth and unique cultural identity. Our suggestions for the orange economy in Tobago are designed to harness the potential of the creative sectors while promoting sustainable development and cultural preservation. And under cultural preservation, you can expect that a PNM administration will invest heavily in programs that celebrate, promote, and preserve Tobago's unique cultural heritage, not destroy Tobago's unique cultural heritage, including traditional art, music, dance, and folklore. Cultural tourism initiatives promote cultural tourism by establishing additional festivals, events, and exhibitions that attract visitors and showcase Tobago's vibrant scene. Intellectual property protection. Strengthen intellectual property protection mechanisms to safeguard the rights of artists and creators, encouraging innovation and originality. Establish legal frameworks that support fair compensation and recognition for Tobagonian creative works. Madam Presiding Officer, nurturing Tobago's orange economy, recognizing it is as vital a driver of economic growth, cultural preservation, and global recognition. Through these initiatives, we will aim to create a vibrant and sustainable creative ecosystem that benefits Tobagonians and contributes to the island's overall prosperity. The blue economy. The importance of the blue economy, the sustainable use of ocean resources in Tobago's economic development has been recognized. Our platform for the blue economy is designed to harness the potential, and may I say at this time, Madam Presiding Officer, that under intellectual property, I will be registering this so that they won't steal my ideas. Madam Presiding Officer, Our platform for the blue economy is designed to harness the potential of marine resources while ensuring environmental conservation and the well-being of coastal communities. Sustainable fisheries management. Collaborate with fisherfolk communities to develop and enforce regulations that promote sustainable fishing practices. Aquaculture development. Promote the growth of aquaculture as a sustainable alternative to traditional fishing. Provide economic opportunities while reducing pressure on wildlife populations. Marine conservation and biodiversity protection. Implement measures to combat illegal fishing, poaching, and other activities that threaten marine biodiversity. Renewable energy from the sea. Collaborate with experts and industry partners to develop and implement marine-based renewable energies. The tourism industry. Madam Presiding Officer, undoubtedly it has been recognized that the tourism sector in Tobago has a pivotal role in economic growth, job creation, and the promotion of Tobago's unique cultural and natural assets. Tourism development in Tobago should encompass a comprehensive approach to woo investors, enhance infrastructure, attract visitors, and sustainably manage the industry. As I always say, Madam Presiding Officer, our tourism sector should really be seen in the same light that the country sees our energy sector. Tourism should be to Tobago what energy is to Trinidad, and therefore that is where we should really build our economy around. And therefore, a PNM administration coming into government once more will ensure that we invest in tourism infrastructure development, invest in the improvement, modernization, and expansion of tourism-related infrastructure, including airports, seaports, roads, and public amenities, to ensure seamless travel experiences for visitors, including those with restricted mobility. Upgrade, regulate, and maintain accommodations, attractions, and recreational facilities to meet international standards. Community-based tourism initiatives. Encourage community-based tourism initiatives that empower local communities to actively participate in and benefit from the tourism industry. Facilitate homestays, cultural exchanges, and guided tours led by community members to create authentic and meaningful experiences for visitors. Eco-tourism and nature-based adventures. Capitalize on Tobago's natural beauty by promoting ecotourism initiatives, nature-based activities, and sustainable adventure tourism. Ensure the preservation of delicate ecosystems through responsible tourism practices and conservation efforts. Support the establishment of eco-friendly accommodations, guided nature tours, and educational programs to raise awareness about environmental conservation. Sport tourism opportunities, and this is one of my favorite parts. Attract sport events and tournaments to Tobago to tap into the sport tourism market. Develop sport facilities such as the cricket facility I mentioned earlier, and collaborate, since T20 is a big thing now, and collaborate with sports organizations to host competitions that draw participants and spectators from around the world. So maybe the Mason or Lee, we can make it bigger and attract other teams from other places. Adventure and wellness tourism. Promote Tobago as an adventure destination offering hiking, bird watching, and wellness retreats that cater to health-conscious and adventure-seeking tourists. And as this is why I am so disappointed with this Roxborough Health Facility. It is very close to the beach. And by now we should have had a plan, a strategy as to how we can leverage that facility as a real wellness hospital, because of the natural, rustic, and environmentally clean and friendly, pristine environment that is the Far East. You can, in fact, really get people coming to Tobago for treatment, spending months and weeks and days, getting the benefit of whatever therapeutic, whatever clinical care they require, and also being able to benefit from Tobago's natural environment and beauty, just being able to spend the rest of the day looking at the beach. Imagine staying somewhere in Speyside or Charlottesville, where you have that kind of calming environment. That is something that should have been, if we were well thought out, well-meaning, that is something we're going to ensure we bring and introduce to that Rocks Row health facility that you fail to operationalize 24/7. Support the establishment of eco-friendly accommodations, guided nature tours, and educational programs to raise awareness about environmental concerns. Digital marketing and tourism promotion. There's something called digital nomads. That is people who simply come to the beach, work from at distance on their digital platform, on their computers, and they just want to have that kind of natural. They want to enjoy the beach while working on their own time at their own speed. And this is something, if we put the systems in place, because the Secretary of Tourism talk about this digitizing this the space, but where are we with that? So that we can really promote Tobago as a space for digital nomads. Very early in this tenure, I said perhaps at Cove, we can leverage to this space. You have Google and all these people. Tell them Tobago can be one of those first spaces where you have this kind of hub, digital hub, where people can come and enjoy again a space that is very calming, very relaxing, and do their business and their outsourcing to the world. But here again, and you can have continuous exchanges. So no person is coming and stay for any long time. What they would do is continue, replace people, and so you find different ways of building out a robust tourism industry. Madam Presiding Officer, and as I said, engage in strategic partnership with travel influencers, bloggers, and digital marketing experts to increase visibility and attract a diverse range of visitors. Dedication must be given to the sustainable development of tourism in Tobago, aiming to create a vibrant and diverse industry that showcases the island's beauty, culture, and hospitality. Through these initiatives, we aim to position Tobago as a top-tier tourist destination, while ensuring the well-being of local communities and the preservation of Tobago's natural and cultural treasures. Food production and food security, Madam Presiding Officer. Advancing food production and ensuring food security in Tobago through sustainable agricultural practices, innovation, and community engagement should be a priority area for Tobago. Focus should be placed on fostering a resilient and sufficient food system that meets nutritional needs of Tobagonians, while facilitating the expansion of the sector in the national, regional, and international markets. Diversification of agricultural products. Encourage the diversification of crops and livestock to reduce dependency on a limited range of products. Support research and development initiatives to identify crops that thrive in Tobago's climate and are in demand locally and regionally. Climate resilient agriculture. Develop climate resilient farming practices to mitigate the impact of climate change on agriculture. Promote the use of sustainable and organic farming methods to enhance soil health and reduce environmental impact. Market access and distribution networks. Facilitate market access for local farmers and fisherfolk by connecting them with markets, supermarkets, restaurants, and hotels, something currently desperately lacking by the work of TATCO. TATCO is outsourcing and competing and even bringing other companies like Novo to compete with our Tobago-based agro-processors. Develop efficient distribution networks to ensure the timely and widespread availability of locally produced food. Technology adoption in agriculture. Introduce modern agricultural technologies, precision farming, and sustainable farming practices. Increase efficiency and yields. Facilitate training programs for farmers to adopt new technologies and best practices. Madam Presiding Officer, I turn to protecting workers' rights and creating jobs, something we, the people's national movement, protected and preserved and ensured. Just yesterday, Madam Presiding Officer, after we created a policy as the People's National Movement Tobago administration, that if you are a contract worker within the Tobago House of Assembly, and if you would have worked a certain period of time, and if by some chance you were able to have a lateral opportunity or even a higher opportunity, and you chose to take up that opportunity, you would be in fact given a contract without prejudice, which means that you do not lose your benefits. Madam Presiding Officer, I was shocked when I was told that there are a number of files at the Division of Education which is on hold because they are now looking at some legal anomaly as to prevent persons from being able to access their contract without prejudice entitlements. That is the information. So here again, you're not only are they firing contract workers, not only are they not renewing contract workers, but they are now trying to deny contract workers their legitimate entitlements. And this is something the People's National Movement ensured they place, whether you supported us or didn't support us. Once you work and once you would have completed your time, and once you moved on, you are able to get your entitlements from your previous place of work once you are so entitled. But this administration, anti-worker, right now they must have about 5 court cases, 1 done win and many more to go. I am now sitting down waiting to see what is to come. Madam Presiding Officer, putting home ownership in reach of every Tobagoan. Affordable housing initiatives, innovative construction methods and materials will be prioritized. We will not go to St. Vincent to learn how to build low-income house because we know how to build low-income house right here in Tobago. So we won't take $250,000, $250,000 to go for St. Vincentians to tell us how to take sand from the sea to build house. Madam Presiding Officer, support for first-time home buyers. Specialized, hear this young people, I want young people to listen. Specialized financial assistance programs, such as down payment assistance and favorable mortgage terms, will be designed to support first-time home buyers. All right, well, we dealt with healthcare, sports. Let me deal a little bit with Tobago's security because that is a very important part of the challenges in Tobago right now. Strengthening law enforcement, increase resources for Tobago, community outreach, invest in coastal security, invest in technology for security, economic stability and job creation. Recognize the connection between economic stability and security and focus on job creation and economic initiatives to reduce socio-economic factors contributing to crime. Combating climate change and building resilience. Renewable energy transition. Accelerate the transition to renewable energy sources such as solar and wind power to reduce Tobago's carbon footprint. Green infrastructure development. Invest in green infrastructure projects, including sustainable transport, resilient buildings, and eco-friendly urban planning. Waste management and recycling programs. Implement comprehensive waste management programs that prioritize recycling, composting, and waste reduction. Promote community-based recycling initiatives and provide incentives for business to adopt sustainable waste practices. Madam Presiding Officer, the minority and the People's National Movement is dedicated to combating climate change and ensuring Tobago's resilience in the face of environmental challenges. Through these initiatives, we aim to protect our natural resources, promote sustainable development, and secure a resilient future for Tobago. Before I close, Madam Presiding Officer, I will be particularly negligent if I do not address what I perceive as a very dangerous trend emanating from the Chief Secretary. It is one thing, Madam Presiding Officer, for the Chief Secretary to blame Trinidad and the central government for his and his secretaries' missteps, miscalculations, malfeasance, and mismanagement. It is quite another thing when he seeks to divide Trinidadians and Tobagonians who may have different opinions on key issues affecting Tobago. Madam Presiding Officer, the Chief Secretary has the audacity to say to this august chamber that anyone who does not share his views on the issue of autonomy for Tobago is a traitor and a sellout. Madam Presiding Officer, such crass, unpatriotic, unstatesmanlike language is clearly unbecoming of a Chief Secretary. Has Tobago embarked on a journey of Trumpism? And here they were, Madam Presiding Officer, destomping as if they were MAGA Republicans. Inflammatory, uncouth, unflattering, and deprecatory labels must never be ascribed to Tobagonians who disagree with you or your administration. It is infradig. As a leader, if someone does not share, check your dictionary. Check your Google thing. No, but who is 3 hours? Huh? No, how much time do I have?
Honorable members. Members.
No, for my time.
Assemblyman James. Thank you. Assemblyman Morris, you may continue.
Yeah, concluding, I almost done. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Presiding Officer. So, Madam Presiding Officer, as I was saying, such crass, unpatriotic, and unstatesmanlike language is clearly unbecoming of a Chief Secretary. And I ask the question again, has Tobago embarked on a journey of Trumpism? Madam Presiding Officer, as a leader, if someone does not share your view, it is your responsibility to persuade that person, to convince that person, and to prevail on. That is what you call leadership, especially in a democratic society as ours. This House needs to be reminded that it was a PNM administration that conducted consultations, eventually approving a bill in this same House in 2016 that is now at the committee stage of the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. Maybe they forget that one of their incompetent advisors in the early days of the process refused to be part of the dialogue of the Tobago side and shamelessly sat with those across the waters who opposed that very same bill. I say to the Chief Secretary, think again. That's not the way. Madam Presiding Officer, perhaps had they not derailed the aforementioned bills, then today, Tobago would have automatically received 6.8% of the projected $65.8 billion of the national budget, which is actually approximately $500 million more than the money that we actually now trying to get. So here it is. You refuse a guaranteed 6.8%, which is about $4.4 billion, and you have to now go and make a case to see if you could get 3.9 billion. So imagine you was getting guaranteed, without any question, 4.4 billion, but you have to now go and make a case to get 4 billion, which the history show really is reduced to somewhere about 4.03%. which is about 2.5 or 2.6 billion. So it's a case about the dog and the bone. You had in your mouth for consumption 6.8%, and you're now going to try to fight to get 5.8%. That is the kind of jokers we have administering Tobago's economy at this time. Madam Presiding Officer, therefore we find ourselves at a critical juncture, facing the harsh reality that the dreams and aspirations we once held dear have been left unfulfilled by an administration that has consistently failed us. The Tobago House of Assembly, under the leadership of my schoolmate, Farley Chavez Augustine, has squandered the trust and hope we placed in them. This administration has not only failed to deliver on its promises, but has also exacerbated the hardships faced by Tobagonians today. The statistics and evidence are clear. Despite a cumulative allocation of over $7 billion, the question therefore is, what tangible benefits do we, the people of Tobago, have to show for it? With a population, as I mentioned before, of only about 60,000 people, this equates to an average of about $1.1 million per person. Yet, the question again I ask, has the average Tobagonian truly felt the impact of these vast resources of over $7 whopping billion? And the answer, if you ask the people of Tobago, is a resounding no. Instead of fostering prosperity, this administration has spirited away our resources, leaving many of us in a state of economic despair. Our infrastructure has deteriorated, our agricultural sector neglected, our tourism industry misrepresented and destroyed. The promises of better roads, financial support for farmers, technological advancements, and improved market access have largely remained empty words, while our private sector businesses are struggling. This is not merely a failure of policy. It is a betrayal of the trust we placed in those we elected to serve us. The administration's inability to manage and deliver on its commitments has abused the trust of Tobagonians, leaving us to bear the brunt of their incompetence. We see it in our daily lives. The struggling small business owner, the farmer without proper irrigation or road access, the youth without adequate opportunities. As we navigate these challenging times, it is imperative that we, the people of Tobago, stand united in demanding better, whether you support them or whether you don't. We must hold this administration accountable for its failures and demand transparency at all levels, integrity, and a genuine commitment to improve our lives. However, in the face of these challenges, there is hope. As a minority leader and a proud member of the People's National Movement, I assure you that we are indeed in preparation mode. We have learned from our past errors. Yes, we have made errors, and we are now better equipped and more determined than ever to meet the needs of all Tobagonians. The PNM is committed to a vision of Tobago that is prosperous, inclusive, and thriving. We have seen the positive impact of the current PNM-led central government. We know that through strong collaboration, we can bring even greater benefits to the people of Tobago. Our central government has made strides in various sectors, including energy, health, trade, education, tourism, and infrastructure. And we are ready to extend these successes to Tobago. Imagine a Tobago where our farmers receive the support they need, Our roads are well maintained. Our youth have ample opportunities, and our tourism industry is vibrant and accurately represented. This is the Tobago we envision, Madam Presiding Officer, and this is the Tobago we are ready to build with each and every Tobagonian willing to walk the pathway of development. Let us not be swayed by empty promises and political rhetoric. Let us remember the unfulfilled dreams and aspirations that have marked this administration's tenure. We deserve leadership that prioritizes our well-being over their own personal gain, that invests in our future rather than squandering our present. Tobagonians, my fellow Tobagonians, whether you are in the chamber, outside the chamber, on the website, on the Assembly Legislature page, listen TV, or at some point we take in this response, the time for real change is now. Let us raise our voices and call for an administration that will truly represent our interests, not outsmart we, not go in with one party and then change their names, not pretend that they're humble and then when you call them they're saying, ease me up, not turn off their phones, not stop walk and knock on your doors to find out how your day is going. We will and we need people who will walk the talk and talk the walk all throughout their tenure. Madam Presiding Officer, we need people that deliver on their promises. You don't want somebody who will tell you yesterday and no tomorrow. We want someone who will truly keep their word. And when they give you their word is their bond. And one that would work tirelessly to uplift every member of our community. Together under the PNM's leadership led by Ansel Dennis, we can forge a path towards a brighter and a more prosperous Tobago. I thank you.